Right, good evening everybody. Good evening everybody. Welcome members of the public here this evening. Speakers, welcome to those who are watching and listening at home or wherever. Welcome to this meeting of Derbyshire Dales Planning Committee held here at Matlock Town Hall on Tuesday the 13th of August 2023. Just before we start the meeting, I hope we won't be here at 10:15 this evening because, as a bonus of finishing early, Councillor Lees has some fruit and vegetables available over behind him. So, yeah. Right. Just some introductions first before we start the formalities of the meeting. My name is Councillor Peter O'Brien. From the Hathersage ward, and I'm chairing the meeting this evening. With me, we have Councillor Sue Burfoot, my vice chair on my right. We've got three of our officers from the planning service, Sarah Arben, Edward Vordin, and Sean Robson. We've got our legal services manager, Kerry France, on my right here, and from our Democratic Services Department looking after the conduct of the meeting, we've got Tommy Shaw on my left here. Just for members of the public, the toilets are in the corridor to the left through the doors behind you or downstairs. There's refreshments in the corridor, water, or if you want tea or coffee out of a machine, you're welcome to try that. I can't vouch for its quality. We've no fire alarms planned this evening. The emergency exit is double doors behind you or the doors over to my left. When we come on to the applications, I'll run through the formalities of number of minutes you have to speak as objectors or supporters or agents. So we'll come on to that when we get on to the business. Right, so we start the meeting itself. Item 1 is apologies for absence. Please, Tommy.
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Burton, Councillor Boynton, Councillor Murphy, and Councillor Shelley is here as a substitute. Item
2 is approval of the minutes of previous meetings. We have two minutes of two previous meetings to approve, please, colleagues. First one is the 11th of June 2024. Would someone like to move approval of those minutes? Yeah. Councillor Slack and Councillor Buttle. Thank you. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous, thank you. And our meeting on the 9th of July 2024, would someone like to move approval of that? Councillor Lees, Councillor Dobbs. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous again. Thank you, colleagues. Item 3 is members' interests. Does anyone need to declare interest in any of the applications here for consideration this evening? Councillor Burfoot.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I need to declare a non-pecuniary interest in applications 5.5 and 5.4 relating to the Royal Bank of Scotland, in that I am a supporter stroke friend of Matlock Civic Association, and I know they're speaking tonight. I'm not an active member and I don't go to meetings, so therefore I don't vote on anything today.
You, Councillor Burfoot, that's noted. Any further interest to declare? No? Good. Okay, we'll move on to the substantive part of the meeting. That's to consider the applications. For members of the public, if you're speaking, is registered to speak in respect of an application, then you speak before each application is considered. So we take it in turn. So the first application this evening we're looking at is an application in Marston Montgomery. This is for the erection of two dwelling houses, a full application for the erection of two dwelling houses on land to the west of Orchard View in the village. And we have one speaker here this evening, Mr. Andrew Stock, who's the agent. He's going to speak in favour of the application. Andrew, if you'd like to come over to the desk then, as agent, you have 5 minutes to speak in favour. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Right. Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I'd like to thank the case officer for the positive engagement throughout the consideration and the assessment of the application. Unfortunately, she's not here this evening. However, I would fundamentally disagree with the recommendation put forward to members this evening on several key points. On the principle of development, the case officer suggests that the proposal would result in unwarranted form of development. However, it is acknowledged that the District Council is unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, only demonstrating 3.49 years worth of supply using the current standard methodology for local housing need. As such, there's a clear warranted need for the new housing in the district. I'm sure the Council is fully aware of the draft updates to the National Planning Policy Framework and the revised standard methodology for assessing local housing need, which will significantly increase the amount of new homes that will be delivered, particularly in the district, nearly double the current rate at the moment. The new Labour government has promised to deliver 1.5 homes over the next 5 years, with the emphasis on the local planning authority to adhere to mandatory housing targets rather than recommended at the moment. The proposed development would promote the effective use of land by encouraging the erection of two dwelling houses within a 4th-tier settlement, and as such constitute a sustainable form of development within the 4th-tier settlement of Marston Montgomery, in accordance to local plan policies. In social terms, the development would contribute towards meeting the District Council's objectively assessed housing needs in the form of 2 family homes. In turn, this will assist Marston Montgomery Primary School, which is currently under capacity, in encouraging families into the local area. The other key point raised by the case officer is the impact on the countryside. It's hoped that members were all able to visit the site yesterday to appreciate the application in its context. Whilst yes, the site in policy terms is within the defined countryside, the site relates to a small parcel of land which is flanked by new residential development, Orchard View to the east and Old School Meadows to the south. I hope members agree that the Orchard View development to the east integrates well with the immediate and wider context of Marston Montgomery. This application looks to extend that development in a westerly direction, in what I call a quasi-agricultural style. Perhaps it would be useful if members or officers could show the CGI visuals on the plan to demonstrate how it will integrate with the wider area. It's proposed to erect 2 bespoke dwelling houses, 2.5-storey L-shaped buildings which have traditional red brick and plain tiles. This will reflect the Orchard View development. The development has been carefully considered to design and create a physical relationship between the existing quasi-agricultural farm grouping at Orchard View and the proposed development. It is considered that the scheme continues this convincing agricultural farmstead appearance that's successfully integrated into the settlement of Marston. I firmly believe that the proposed dwellings can be easily absorbed into the immediate context and will not detract from the character of the area. Solar panels will be providing majority of the electricity to the buildings, and air source heat pumps will also be fitted. To finish, there are no technical objections relating to this application. They're purely subjective reasons for refusal. It's hoped that members of this planning committee take a different view this evening when understanding the detailed nature of the site itself and the proposed development, in line with the new Labour government in terms of the suggestion of 1.5 million homes going forward. I therefore ask you to take a contrary view this evening and to approve the application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm now going to ask Sean Robson, our development manager, to introduce the application, which you'll see on your papers is recommended for refusal.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I can just draw members' attention to the screen, I'll just go through the presentation and some photographs for those that were unable to meet the site or attend the site visit. So the area marked in red is the application site. As mentioned by the actual agent, the area to the west is what's already been developed. That originally formed part of the original built-out farmstead farm buildings, therefore effectively brownfield land. The slide in front of you now just shows the units being proposed on the site, L-shaped formation units for plots 1 and 2. This is just a visualisation of the elevational details to the buildings to reflect a barn conversion style development, as is what's already been developed to the east of the site. It just shows the internal layout of the actual each unit. So So the shading or the lighting on this is not very good. This just shows the bar gate to the bottom of the screen, which basically is looking into the site. This is a photograph taken from the top end of the site, the area that's already been built out to the east. This is the existing development, which was on the former farmyard area. And this is just shots around the site that just shows the actual style, countryside location of the actual development. And this final slide is just taken from the rear of the application site, part of the application site, looking back towards those properties that have been built to the east of the development site. The application is recommended for refusal as it doesn't comply with policy. And the development in itself is for 2 dwellings. It's been suggested that the development itself forms part of a continuation of the settlement, a Tier 4 settlement. However, officers do not believe that this is the case, and therefore the application is recommended for refusal as highlighted in Section 8 of the officer report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sean. Now, over to members' questions. Could I remind you, please, if we could have a maximum of 3 questions, and please ensure they are questions rather than statements. Councillor Hughes first.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions. One on drainage, first of all, and and sewers really. And the second one is really on this principle of development outside the boundary of the site of Marston Montgomery. On drainage, I noticed that the Environment Agency was concerned about the lack of a drainage strategy. Has one been submitted, and is the brook below the site protected now, or is there other issues still with that?
Sorry, through you, Chair, if I can come back on that point. If I can draw attention to page 31 of the papers, the Environment Agency have come back and they've actually advised a condition on there that where obviously the application is in front of members for approval,
Yeah.
but they have come back and recommended that the actual recommended details to be submitted to and agreed in writing. Now, from speaking to the officer, it was felt that that was the appropriate use of that condition. The brook itself, the second point, the brook itself, as far as we could ascertain, that in itself wasn't protected, but where the application to be recommended contrary to the report, that condition would enclose most of that or cover most of those points.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Now, on the reason for refusal, which is that it encroaches into the countryside effectively and potentially leads an opportunity for further encroachment, as I understand it. Is it reasonable that we take into consideration prospective actions that aren't included in the planning application, or should we be just assessing this on the grounds that there are 2 houses that are going to be built in a space, and if it was a completely new application, then that's what we would be considering?
So through you, Chair. In short, basically, it's what we've got in front of us this evening to consider the 2 plots. It's always difficult when you whenever you look at any planning application, if there's been a previous history, or it forms part of a larger site, to think, what if? But obviously, in front of members this evening is the 2 plots that's been presented. So that's what the recommendations put forward on, and that's what members have to consider this evening.
You said at the end of your opening statement that it was argued that the development would be consistent with the village, and then you said the officer's view is it isn't. Have I got the right phrase? Well, several words you said it isn't, and I just wanted you to elaborate a bit more on why you said it's not.
Oh, sorry. I know. I think the agent obviously was suggesting that it was consistent with the form of the village and formed an infill element as such. When officers have looked at it, if I can just, the red line to the frontage, effectively what looks like a very squashed shaped T-shaped formation, that's the application site. And I think basically there's the development to the south, which is relatively new build properties. And there are some other spatterings of properties further along, if you go further up the village, that do project further out or comparable distance out to the application site. But in this particular instance, a previous application was refused because it informed the whole entire site, i.e. the site that's in blue to the rear. And through consideration, through discussions with the agents, it was negotiated that the formation or the building of the 7 units to the frontage was built out. What was the former, effectively brownfield or former built-up area of the actual application site. So this particular element, or this portion of this element, it was felt in this particular instance that it was just out of keeping with the settlement and out of keeping with the form of the built form of the majority of the village. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Burfoot.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarification, really, when the 7 houses were built, am I right in thinking that that was what was considered a modest encroachment onto the countryside, as the bulk of that development was on a site that had already been developed, so that the farm, the old farm buildings, and that is what you're saying now, that to go any further beyond the original farm grouping is a step too far. Is that what we're saying, basically?
In short, yes. I mean, the portion that has been built out and has been built to reflect the barn conversion element, that in itself was felt that was the appropriate form of development to go on this particular site, because the site itself was effectively built up. There's a number of farm buildings and elements and paraphernalia on the site. That was removed and the development was effectively slotted in. And yes, to go back to the last point that you raised, it is felt that in this particular instance, this is just taking it too far outside the book form.
Councillor Maelstrom.
Thank you. Would you be able to go back to the site plan in more detail? Yeah. Is it going to be possible to get a driveway sort of further along and through the 2 properties? Or, I mean, it looks to me as though this development now really caps off the prospect of any development of the field behind now. It sort of turns it into a cul-de-sac. Is that right, or is there still a gap through where it's still shaded?
Sorry, the quality of the actual slide's not ideal, but you can see whether the number 7 was a gap in the hedge, as it were, to the rear of the properties, to the west of it. I don't know if you can see that there's a tree in the field and there's a continuous or proposed hedgerow, and there's a gap. So effectively between the 2 properties, what's been proposed is the continuation of the roadway. It just terminates at the rear of those 2 units. So effectively, arguably at this stage, it could be used for a field entrance, but
Yeah.
it would be a wide entrance going into that field at the
So
rear.
it's potentially leaving the gate open effectively to further development on that field. I'm not saying that would be granted, but physically, would that be possible?
All I could say on this, with degree of certainty, this particular application, it's just a field entrance going into the field at the rear.
Any further questions? If not, we're going to move into debate. We have a recommendation. The application is refused. Would someone like to? Councillor Archer.
Yeah, I'm happy to go along with that recommendation and move that. I think from visiting the site yesterday, when you stand and look over that gate, I'm in agreement that you are looking at a rural scene, the countryside scene, and it would therefore be encroachment onto open countryside. And I don't want to be setting a precedent on that matter that may encourage other developers to push to build more developments in open countryside on the edge of villages and so on. So on that basis, I'm happy to move the recommendation of our officers.
Councillor Lees.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, happy to second it. Thank you.
Wish to speak? Councillor Hughes, yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to raise a matter of principle, really, and that is in communities like Marston Montgomery, it'll be nearly impossible to build any additional houses without encroaching greenfield sites. Yet, these communities often need additional buildings, additional houses. We heard about the local school not having a full role. And I'm wondering whether we can take as dogma that we should not build on greenfield sites on Tier 4 settlements, but we should allow them when they are well designed and don't encroach into, form some sort of bulwark into a greenfield. And this one potentially doesn't form a bulwark into a greenfield. It's really, if there are dwellings extending out into the fields beyond where this development will go to the side of it, and then there is another development called the barn further up the lane, which also extends out. So really, this is filling in could be considered to be infill between the barn and the existing dwellings to the southwest. So I haven't come to a view about this yet, even now, but I just raised this as a question: that should we never allow building on greenfield sites, or should we allow greenfield sites on occasion? And is this one where it would be reasonable to allow a greenfield development? Thank you.
Thank you, David. This is an issue which we are debating in the local plan review at present. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Similar to David, I've not made my mind up properly on this one. Looking over the gate, the field isn't high quality. It's poor agricultural field. It's stony. It's very rough, and I thought it wouldn't be a bad site for these houses to be built. And I think also looking at it, it's kind of infill really. So I am swayed to go against the officer's recommendation on this one. I think we desperately need houses, and same as I say, the schools struggling to keep going because a lot of the houses in Marston Montgomery are holiday lets. So you get a lot of children, a very small number of families not there. So you need to encourage families to come into the village to build it up again. So I'm not decided entirely, but I'm a little bit in between. Thank you.
Any further points anyone would like to make? Councillor Dobbs.
Thank you, Chair. I'm inclined to go with officer recommendations. I can see the problem of restricting village developments to infill, which will come up doubtless not as frequently as we would need for our required supply. However, I think in this particular case there is a logic where the 3 buildings on this little cul-de-sac were built essentially on the footprint of the old farm buildings, and to say, well, that's fine, that is replacement with the design that they are, looking like replacement, essentially infill, and to say beyond that would be encroaching on the countryside. It has a logic. I think if this is refused, then doubtless we will in the future be considering this site again with a different application, I'm sure. But I think there is a logic about refusing this at this particular point in time. Thank you.
Shelley.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I haven't actually been to the site, so I'm going entirely on the report here and the photographs. But from what I can see, again, there's a logic to the reasoning behind the officer recommendation. The thing that would sway me in another direction, I think, would be if there were more reference to affordable housing on this site, because that's something that we talk about many, many times in relation to our rural communities as well as the towns. So that would have been more of a deciding factor for me, and perhaps a hint to the developer.
Mr. Buttle.
I think I understand all the arguments being put so far. If the parish council had said, yes, we were in full support, I'd give a bit more thought to the argument about stretching it and it being infill. As the parish council are not really fully in support, I don't think I'll be voting to support the officers. But there was another point I wouldn't mind raising, if that's possible. the reason for determination by committee is the number of objections received. Now, that just seems slightly odd. You know, like the more objections, the more likely we are to look at it. And when the officers are going against, I think maybe we should have a look at rewriting our framework for putting things forward for determination by committee. Thanks.
Any further comments? Right, I'll give you my views before I move to a vote. I think there's a number of very interesting points being made this evening, and I think I am going to support officers' recommendation. I think that had there not been the potential access through to further development land shown, I may have taken a different view. What I would say to Marston Montgomery Parish Council and residents there is that the council really wants to work with local communities to identify opportunities for sensitive new development, but we want to do it by consent, by working with communities. And as I said in response to Councillor Hughes, this is something we are going to address in the local plan review. Right, we've had a motion to support the recommendation to refuse. Can we have all those in favour of that proposal, please show? All those against? And any abstentions? 2 abstentions. So that motion is carried and the application is refused. Our second application for consideration this evening is an application by the District Council itself on the Northwood Depot up in Darley Dale, the installation of 112 solar PV panels on the roof of one of the buildings and an air source heat pump to replace the gas boiler. We've got Edward Vordin here this evening. Is this your first presentation at committee? So welcome to Planning Committee. Edward Vordin making his first presentation to committee this evening. We've no speakers on this item, so Edward, it's over to you to introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this site is located in Northwood, which is a third-tier settlement. This is the Northwood Depot, which is a Derbyshire Dales County Council, District Council asset. So it is subject to policy S3 in the local plan, and it is effectively supported in principle due to the local plan's policy PD7 on renewable energy. So the site is effectively located south of the recycling centre. These are various location plans and block plans. So obviously the solar panels will be located on both the pitches of the roof, and the air source heat pump will be located I believe to the south. Obviously it's very small scale, so given the siting, considering that it's predominantly surrounded by sort of hard boundaries and large trees, a lot of the development will not be visible to the public realm. The site is located in flood zone 2. However, based on the nature of the development and the scale of the development, it's very minimal and not considered to result in any material impact on flooding. And as I say, with regards to character, there's limited views of the site, and particularly of the proposed development itself. And considering the context that the building is an existing depot of a commercial/industrial appearance, it's not considered that the addition of solar panels or an air source heat pump would have any adverse changes to the character of the area. And then with regards to amenity impacts, it's well distanced from any residential properties, and it's not considered that there would be any material impacts on both any residential properties or on the neighbouring commercial uses of the site as well. So on that basis, I put forward a recommendation for members to grant.
Do you have any elevations you could put on the screen for us?
Yeah, so these are the proposed plans here, which includes a specification, as well as the location of the solar panels and the air source heat pump.
All right, thank you, Edward. That was very concise and helpful. Thank you. Well done. Questions from members. Councillor Shelley.
Thank you. Yes, I just wonder if we could, I can appreciate there's a plan there, which I can't see terribly clearly. Are the solar panels covering the complete roof space? Are they, in other words, are they taking full advantage of the space we've got there? And if they're not, would there be the potential to expand those and perhaps assist neighbouring businesses with supply of electricity? So that's one question. The second one would be along the lines of whether there is battery provision along with the solar panels so that the site can effectively take care of its needs overnight. I'm guessing that some of the charging facility will be to actually power vehicle recharging overnight. So it's really along those lines to maximise the benefit that we can make from one of our own sites. Please.
Thank you, Councillor. So the solar panels are located on the eastern roof slope. As far as I'm aware, that is the best place to get the most advantage from the sun trails in that regard. As for whether or not that a battery is proposed, it's not within the description of the development. However, it would unlikely constitute development, and in this instance, it will be the purpose of the air source heat pump is to replace an existing boiler for the depot.
And on the question of whether the roof is covered to its most advantageous?
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of whether or not it's taking full, the best possible advantage in terms of having maximum solar gain, I don't have that information present. I've assessed the application before me on that basis. So, as such, I think that's in terms of its support in policy. That's why the recommendation is what it is, and if I'm sure there's potential to include further solar panels if the council sees fit to do so.
Sussnack.
Thank you. My question was similar to Councillor, but another question I'd like to ask, being it's all around charging the daylight, obviously, but at night we want to charge the vehicles up ready for starting off the next day. So overnight we'll be using a lot of electricity. So really a battery is desperately needed there to store power so we can charge the vehicles up overnight for going out the next day. So it's something I'd like to see a battery included in this application.
Please keep them to questions coming. Councillor Buttle, please.
Welcome aboard. I visited yesterday, and everything is absolutely spot on. This description of what's there is what's there. I thought we ought to get it right. I mean, it's one of ours. I don't see is any information about whether or not the safety of the air source heat pump and the flood zone 2 and the fact that it's going to be on a concrete base. Now, I'm curious about that. If it's 5 feet up, then that's great, and if it isn't, it's not. My question is, would it be possible for you to follow this up as it's installed and make sure that it's out of the water should we be flooded?
Thank you, Councillor. I think in terms of the location and in terms of the specification of how the air source heat pump's delivered, from a planning perspective, the consideration was that it was minimal enough not to warrant the full works in terms of flood risk management to that end, in terms of whether or not it impact on flood risk. So it'd most likely be down to building regulations outside of planning control and making sure that the air source heat pump is safe, in events of flood. So that'll be covered at the point in which they want to implement the permission.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Do we know what output these panels would produce? On my estimation is about 22 kilowatts. Would that be about right?
Thank you, Councillor. I do not have that information up front in terms of it being in the description of development. Obviously, the air source heat pump itself is 13 kilowatts, but as to the output of the solar panels, that's not something that I put in consideration within the officer report, since it was supported in principle.
Right.
Any further questions from my colleagues? If not, we'll move. Sorry, Councillor Dobbs.
Just a quick point. I noticed that the local parish council were concerned about the noise from the air source heat pump. Could you reassure them and anybody listening, watching?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, as I referred to previously. So if we look at the location plan here. So in terms of the surroundings, the nearest residential property is some distance away. I haven't got the measurements to hand, but it's well distanced enough to the point that an air source heat pump, which is unlikely to generate any sort of significant quantity of noise that would be a nuisance, anywhere beyond the site itself. Considering the site itself, as well as the building, it has a decent area of land around it, followed by a surrounding of reasonably dense foliage and trees as well, sort of surrounding the access to the roundabout associated and the access around Northwood Depot. So to that end, I did not consider it to be necessary to limit or control the amount of noise that outputs, in the sense that air source heat pumps are also controlled, again, by building regulations in terms of the level of noise they can emit.
No further questions. Right, we'll move into debate. The recommendation is been mistyped on the papers in front of you. It should, of course, read that the recommendation is to approve the application subject to the conditions. Councillor Hughes.
Yes, Chair. Thank you. I'd like to move officer recommendations on and for this proposal. On the subject of batteries, I expect that in winter the solar panels will about accommodate some of the 13 kilowatts of air source heat pump, and probably won't meet the full requirement. Batteries would of sufficient size to accommodate the 112 solar panels would be rather expensive, and I think would be subject to another, and might actually take up space, might therefore be subject to another planning application. And I'm not sure that it would be necessary or economic to actually install battery capacity when it's likely that the council will be able to get cheaper overnight electricity, which would offset which would be cheaper to use than the battery. That's certainly true of domestic systems, and therefore I would suggest that this is entirely appropriate in my experience.
Thank you, David. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Peacock. Do you wish to add anything? Councillor Dobbs, do you wish to speak? Any members wish to speak on the application? Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's a brilliant application. It's what's needed and what we've got to do. We've got to do more of this on all those buildings. But same as I said previously, I don't disagree with Councillor Hughes. I think batteries are very, very, very good today, and they're improving all the time. So I do think batteries would store electricity. They use them on buses, bus depots, charging the batteries up in the day, ready for charging the buses at night. I'm sure we would benefit from really good commercial heavy-duty batteries, which they're improving every day. So I'll still support the application, but a future application should be brought forward for batteries, I believe. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Shelley.
Yes, just to support the application. I'm particularly pleased that it's on district council building and be in my ward, Darley-Dale. So it ticks both boxes there for me, and hopefully this kind of thing will act as an incentive and a torch lighting the way for other businesses. I know there are others in Darley-Dale and elsewhere in Matlock that are benefiting from the big solar co-op. And you know, the more we can make use of these kind of, particularly the roof spaces for solar gain and power, better.
Other contributions? Thank you for those. Just remind everyone there's Green Open Day in Bakewell this coming Saturday, so please get up now. Right, we have proposals which have been moved and seconded to approve the application subject to conditions. Could we have all those in favour, please show? Tommy is unanimous, so that application is approved. Right, moving on to our third application this evening. This is in the southern part of the district. This is an application for the change of use of an existing dwelling house into a children's home at Jasmine Cottage on Longford Lane in Sutton on the Hill. Two speakers were going to speak against the application, and I've given discretion for the applicant to speak in favour after that. No late representations, so can I invite Alice or Anne, one of you first, to come up and speak. And you have 3 minutes to speak. Thanks.
Okay, so thanks for the opportunity to speak. So as one of the residents who lives within a few hundred metres of Jasmine Cottage, I just want to reaffirm the concerns and fears of many of the residents in the area about the decision is made around the change of use to become a care home for children with challenging emotional and behavioural difficulties and complex needs. So several residents who live in close proximity to Jasmine Cottage are now living in fear over the potential consequences of what could occur when children with behavioural issues are restricted to the confines of the cottage, especially during the winter months and school holidays. Several of the local residents are genuinely frightened and unable to sleep due to the anxiety and fear for their safety and themselves, their children and their grandchildren, as a consequence of the children seeking stimulation away from the cottage. So generations of residents have happily lived in the area, with their children allowed to roam freely around their properties without the fear of intrusion or intimidation, and we feel this is likely to change. Our fear is the children will have no stimulation and will become bored very quickly, with the care staff unable to provide the same parenting skills as most families, and will quickly look for alternative things to occupy them locally. Several residents are farmers and are fearful for their livestock, their crops, machinery and buildings, and they'll be impacted as children brought in from non-farming communities are likely to find adventure on their properties as there's nothing else for them to do in the area. They also won't know how to manage animals or know how the animals react when they're protecting their young. We believe there is a health and safety risk to the children themselves from the animals and moving machinery in the area too. So Jasmine Cottage is located in a rural location in the parish of Longford. There is no amenities for children to play or interact with other children. The nearest playground is several miles away, and neither Longford or Sutton on the Hill have facilities for children to play. The nearest doctors, dentists, etc. are also several miles away, and in the event of an emergency, it will take the emergency services at least 20 minutes to get there. We appreciate there's a need to provide care for children who have been dealt a bad card in life and haven't had the upbringing of a caring family. However, turning a small country cottage into a care home for children with severe emotional and behavioural issues is not the right environment to develop young people. The Council, we've got a duty of care to these vulnerable children. Therefore, we should not be exposing them to the risks posed by moving them to a remote location where it's difficult for staff to get to, especially during the winter months when the roads become flooded or snowbound, as these roads don't always get gritted. There's no street lighting or pavements, and Longford Lane is a busy country lane used by large agricultural machinery, with Jasmine Cottage's front door leading directly onto the road. We can't understand why alternative locations are not better suited, nearer to where the children will go to school, where there are facilities and amenities to occupy the children, and the care staff can take them to places where they can play. And that will help, obviously, develop their social skills and improve their well-being.
If you could wind up, please.
Okay. Okay, so can you just please confirm that the location assessment carried out that includes the steps to ensure the home is needed locally, is in the right location and is safe for the children and aligned with their needs? So the output from this committee meeting is going to affect the lives of local residents forever, and they're including the residing children and carers. Therefore, we respectfully ask the council members to take these concerns into consideration when you make your decision.
Thank you. Anne, would you like to come up and speak?
Put my objection letter forward before to the Derbyshire District Council, and the planning officer has recommended with conditions that this is put forward. So an assessment, my main considerations for this objection are development principle, the sustainable transport and accessibility and residential amenity. So an assessment of this, of the policy of the development principle. The proposed change of use from a residential C3A to a children's home does not align with policy S4, which restricts development in the countryside to essential uses. Is there a need for a children's home in this area? The location is isolated and lacks the necessary infrastructure and services such a use sustainably. There is ample provision for suitable housing in more central, accessible locations, which should be considered before this remote location is selected. The information submitted with the application does not provide a sufficient justification for the loss of a residential unit, and there is no evidence that the children's home cannot be located within an area that complies with the settlement hierarchy and sustainability principles. Sustainable transport and accessibility, referring to policies S1, HC19 and HC20, both emphasise the importance of accessibility and minimising the need for travel by private car. Policy HC20 seeks to manage travel demand by encouraging developments in locations that support sustainable transport options. The proposed location of Jasmine Cottage on Longford Lane is in an isolated countryside setting with no bus stops nearby, no public transport and limited access to taxis. This makes it highly reliant on private car use, contradicting the sustainable development principles. Furthermore, the statement also indicates that staff will use subsidised taxis, but this does not align with the aim of reducing reliance on private cars, nor can it be relied upon as a sustainable, viable business option. The lack of public transport options further exacerbates the unsustainability of the location. The residential amenity, referring to policies S1, HC1 and HC15. Policy S1 emphasised the importance of providing high standards of amenity and accessibility to services for all occupants. Jasmine Cottage remote location on Longford Lane lacks nearby shops, playgrounds, libraries and other essential facilities. This isolation significantly impacts the residential amenities, both the children and their carers, who would need to travel considerable distances to access these basic services. This is not good for the well-being of the children, and they will not flourish. The lack of nearby shops and amenities that carers will face these difficulties on a day-to-day need, such as grocery shopping and essential items, and making the property management impractical. Policy HC15 supports provision of community facilities and services that contribute to the health and well-being of local communities. The remote location, again, of Jasmine Cottage fails to provide access to recreational and social opportunities necessary for the children's development and well-being. And the lack of playgrounds, libraries and all these important things. The garden is small, it's bounded by the road and open farmland, which is adjacent, where farmers are trying to earn a livelihood. They are working the land day and night when the weather is correct.
Can you draw to a conclusion?
Yeah. You know, and there's storage of manure, which has a smell associated with. This is not good for the children. So it's not just from the residents' point of view, the lack of safety infrastructure, there's no pavements, there's no street lighting or anything, and it increases the risk of accidents and injuries. A proposal about
I have to ask you to
October,
conclude, please.
just want to finish. In October, the owner of the property, their application to build another house on their grounds was refused due to the highways, and obviously it's been documented, and its unsustainable location out of any defined settlement. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, our speaker in favour of the application is the applicant Sandeep Manaktala. Sandeep, as the applicant, you have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, fellow councillors. It's a privilege to be able to tell you about us and what we do. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present our case to provide a home in our local area for young people. We are grateful to the Planning Department, the case officer, for recommending the approval of our application, as we are to the highway authorities. We have provided to the Planning Department, can everyone hear me okay here? We have provided to the Planning Department a letter from the head of Children's Placement Services of Derbyshire County Council expressing their support for such a home, as they have a very severe need for such homes in our local area. As the councillors have been made aware, the government had published a ministerial statement on children's homes. It details that councils should work to facilitate the creation of more children's homes where appropriate. We are a family-owned organisation, a local company based in your area, wanting the best for our young people. We have been providing opportunities for young people for over 20 years now. And we have a passion to impact the lives of more and more young people. In terms of size, we're the 17th largest children's home company in the country, employing over 300 care staff. We are preferred provider to the local Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, Derby City, Nottingham City authorities, with whom we have excellent working relationships. We're not an organisation based offshore, not venture capitalists here. We're in your community, providing employment as we fulfil the opportunities presented to us by the local D2N2 councils. We have recently received feedback from Ofsted, the regulatory body that inspects our homes and visits us yearly, that out of the top 40 UK residential care companies, we were awarded as being the top achiever when it comes to measuring the outcomes of the Ofsted grading and the achievements of the children placed with us. We're very proud of the difference our colleagues make in the lives of your children, of our children. No one desires to be in care when they are born or while growing up. That's no one's ambition. But our care system is excellent in this country, as the government reaches out and looks after the most vulnerable in society. And for us, it is very important that we try our very best in that care. We as a company have a duty to look after more young people with our high quality of care. And we've been given a mandate by Derbyshire County Council to provide that within Derbyshire. For that care, the environment is perhaps one of the most important factor. And in our opinion, Jasmine Cottage is an excellent location for such care. Jasmine Cottage will look after 2 young people. That is 2 young people that with the right environment around them can flourish and be positive members of society. We have chosen a rural location out of the city, not adjoining to any properties, with a therapeutic environment in short distance to the countryside, as well as driving distances to local towns and cities. This creates a beautiful setting for our young people to experience the country, as well as lots of opportunities for fun with their friends and family within local communities. These are children, not criminals. These are children within our local community that need a chance, and we're going to provide a family environment for them in our area. There's no adjoining property. There's no off-road parking happening here. We've been able to adjust according to what the planning case officer have said. It will not change the appearance of the area or block the footpath, which is overgrown. Essentially, this is welcoming a new family with 2 children into our neighbourhood. They'll become part of your local community just with added support provided by our skilled and dedicated colleagues. We create our team around them with a family environment. There's a father, there's a mother, there's a naughty auntie who stays up a bit later and provides takeaways. There's that environment around. It's like welcoming a new family into your community. We work hard to bring collaboration with local communities. I understand the fears that the neighbours have. We understand that, but we're not a distant company that aren't going to just not answer any queries. We're local. If you've got a problem about something that we've got, or we've got a query, ask us. We're happy to answer. We have a dean here who's willing to, let you know what we're doing and answer queries very quickly.
Could you draw to a conclusion, please?
Of course.
Sandeep?
We are adaptable. And there is evidence of this where we have adjusted to the parking plans based on the officer's recommendation. And we are on very principle, very accommodating to any suggestions. And I'm grateful for the case officer's recommendation and insight. And I hope that we can be given approval to look after and keep our local children safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. Right, I'm going to ask Edward Vorden to introduce this application. Perhaps, Edward, you could respond as you see fit to the points made by Alistair and Anne.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is planning permission is sought for the conversion of the existing lawful dwelling into a children's home, so it's from a C3 use to a C2 use. The site is located within open countryside. It is south of Longford, so it is subject to policy S4 of the local plan. On the basis that it's a conversion from effectively one residential use to another, it is accepted in principle insofar as it would not conflict with the objectives of the policy in terms of protecting the open countryside. Children's homes themselves are supported in principle under policy HC11, subject to demonstrated local need, which I'll refer to in the Derbyshire County Council Children in Care Sufficiency Strategy, which points to fears that they are not going to meet their demand in terms of providing sufficient children home locations. In terms of the application itself, so this is the wider location plan, so this gives you context as to where it sits in relation to other neighbouring properties and its rural location as a whole. This is more of a site plan, so it was pointed out, of course, that there are public rights of way running through the sites, and this is illustrated on the amended site plan. So one of the car parking spaces that was previously proposed has been removed to ensure that public rights of way remains unobstructed. In terms of the parking provision itself, so 3 spaces, the local planning policy does not actually have specific parking requirements for children's homes themselves. However, a close reference is the requirement for 3 parking spaces as a maximum standard for a 4-bedroom dwelling, which this is as it lawfully stands at the moment. So one of the main points I want to talk about is comparing the existing lawful use of the site as a dwelling to a children's home, and for councillors to consider the differences between its lawful use and the proposed use. So in terms of the principle, again, the Derbyshire County Council is supportive from a children's services perspective in terms of the provision of new children's homes. And on top of this, children's homes have to be registered with Ofsted as well. It would be unlawful to operate the site as a care home without the approval of Ofsted as well, which falls outside of the planning considerations. In terms of matters such as character, there's no major external changes to the appearance of the building itself and the landscaping of the site as a whole. It'll remain very consistent with the existing circumstances. And from a amenity perspective, as referred to it, so it's well distanced from neighbouring properties, meaning there's unlikely to be an impact on things like daylight and privacy outlook, and the same again with noise. In terms of fears of crime, these have been considered appeal previously in other locations, and it's not considered that a children's home would inherently result in a material rise in crime or antisocial behaviour. And furthermore, considering the nature of the proposal and the operation of a children's home, it's unlikely that children are going to be unsupervised for any long periods of time, such that any sort of theories of crime or antisocial behaviour would manifest in that form. In terms of looking at the rest of the plans, so yes, this gives an example of what the previous layout and how it has changed in terms of ensuring that there is room for the public right of way. And these are the proposed elevations of the building, which are very similar to the existing building. I believe that the only external changes relate to the a garage conversion in effect. Those are all the proposed plans.
We had questions from members, I think. Councillor Lee, did you have a question? Can't read. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions really. What ages will they be? Will they range from? Will they be small children or young adults? And the second question is education. Will they be transported to local school or a comprehensive school nearby?
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of what the permission would allow, there wouldn't be any restrictions on the ages of the children specifically. So whilst the company itself or the applicant may have specific ideas of the children that would be cited there, the permission itself would, if it was to be granted, would not be restricting inherently particular characteristics about the children, and the same goes for the schooling methods as well.
Councillor Burfoot.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to also ask about the age of the children, but obviously that's been answered. So I just wonder, how much consideration do we give to the fact that this is basically the loss of a family residential property, and whilst it would become a home for two children, it is essentially a business?
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the level of changes required to facilitate a change of use, it's very minimal. Ultimately, it is going to be operational as a dwelling, whilst managed by a commercial body in form. In substance, the actual day-to-day living will be very similar to the dwelling as it is existing at the moment, in the sense that there will be parental figures and children that are being raised on that basis.
Archer.
Thanks, Chair. Two quick questions. First of all, on sustainable development for this. My instinct is that this change of use would likely lead to an increase in journeys to and from potentially high needs children needing to access facilities in local cities and towns, and obviously carers coming in and out as well. So I know we talked about sustainability of developments a lot in previous meetings, and it has become a reason to turn down some proposals. So I'm very aware this isn't a new building, so I understand that. But my instinct is it will lead to an increase in travel by car to and from. So I just wanted a bit more detail on that in terms of why we feel that is not going to be serious enough to sort of mean that we would turn down this application. So that's the first question. That's sustainable development. And the second one, you partly answered really in saying that in previous similar applications that have gone to appeal about the crime and antisocial behaviour element, the appeals have tended to side with the proposals to change of use to a children's home. Have we also got any evidence of it if there was an increase in crime and antisocial behaviour? This is really just to try and reassure local residents, I suppose. If there was that, and I'm not saying I would assume there would be, but if there was an increase, what action would be taken by, say, Derbyshire County Council or whatever to try and address that? That may well be way outside of your scope, but it's just something that's in my head that I thought I'd ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes. So On the first point with regards to, I guess, sustainable development and impacts on highways. So the National Planning Policy Framework, for a start, gives, so it's paragraph 115 sets the bar for unacceptable impact on highway safety and severe impacts on the road network. So in terms of how planning applications would be assessed, they should not be refused on highway grounds unless it would result in an unacceptable sort of adverse impact on highway safety, or if the residual cumulative impact on the highway network was severe. So whilst there may indeed be an increase in the number of trips, or more trips than one would expect against a dwelling, the assessment is based on comparing what could be done under an existing dwelling. So we have to consider that existing dwellings may also have visits from carers, either for elderly or disabled people, and also likely are going to be, potentially a family of this size could be raising children of their own, and similarly making the same trips. So in terms of comparing the difference between those two uses, both the officer assessment and the highway authority did not consider that would amount to the bar of a severe impact on the local road network. In terms of the question on theory of crime, it's yes, if there was any particular increase of crime, and if that was genuinely attributable to the proposed change of use itself, Ofsted look at registered children's homes extremely closely, as do councils as well. So they will be monitoring all of the children's homes, and sort of they will be listening to any complaints that are made about specific homes, and will expect the operators of those homes to respond accordingly. And if they don't, they will likely be unable to continue to have those homes registered.
Councillor Dobbs.
Thank you, Chair. My question's been answered. Thank you.
Councillor Butcher.
Thank you, Chair. The residents' concerns are very much in my mind, and I didn't feel I was fully persuaded by what we heard from the applicants. And I just wonder what the grounds are for turning it down to something which one might feel is having a negative effect on the local community potentially. It does say there, I won't go into the argument. So I'm just unsure about what the right outcome in this situation should be, and I'd like advice from the officers.
Thank you, Councillor. So in terms of how amenity has been considered in the officer report, so that there's different forms of amenity. So that includes matters such as daylight privacy, outlook, noise, and then fear of crime and antisocial behaviour also forms one of the material considerations in there as well. As I've put forward in the officer report, I've considered that it's the distance from between other neighbouring properties is sufficient, and it is in a rural location. It's not close to a lot of neighbouring properties, so as to give any rise to noise. But to that point, it's not considered in any case that even if it was in close proximity to other dwellings, that a children's home would necessarily result in adverse levels of noise or potentially crime or antisocial behaviour. Again, we have to consider what could be operated on site at the moment. If sort of without this planning application in context, the site could continue to operate as an existing dwelling. An existing family could live there, and the same potential issues can materialise, but those are ultimately controlled in their own right by other bits of legislation as well. So it's that element, and also in terms of how those issues might materialise in practice, the children's home itself, again, it would be managed as well by both central government and local government as well, in terms of monitoring any of those issues that arise and responding to them at the time. From a planning perspective, it's considered to comply with the policies relevant in terms of assessing impacts on amenity.
I think, Bob, it's for any member during debate to agree or disagree with the officer's conclusions. Councillor Lees.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just for clarification, yesterday when we parked the bus, we parked on where the parking area is, but I noticed when we got back on the bus, there's quite a large area of garden to the other side of the property. Is that included in this? It's not very clear on the plan, actually, what's included and what isn't. It's quite a long garden. Is that included as part of the cottage still? Or has it been separated off?
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the red line boundary, in effect, so if permission was granted, the extent of which the site would become a children's home, I believe the red line boundary does include the other element of garden to the south of the site. In terms of, there aren't proposals under this application to make any changes to the existing arrangements, or at least such that would require a planning application. It may well be the case that they want to make other changes, but those none have come forward that would require a planning permission to that end.
Any further questions, colleagues? Councillor Bussell.
Thank you. I noticed that the applicant said that it's like one family in and another one out, or one out and one in, or whatever it is. That's not the case, though, is it? We are actually losing a house in the district because it's being turned into a business. Does that have any relevance whatsoever to our provision of housing to, like our residents?
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of what the lawful use of the building would be, it would still be classed as a residential use. It would not fall under commercial uses as identified within the local plan. It's acknowledged, of course, that it would no longer be, a dwelling that would be sold on that basis for other families to move into. Yes, it would be a children's home in that regard. But from a policy perspective, there's a lot of support for such conversions, in effect, just based on the local needs and the district level need, which is identified by the county council in their children in care sufficiency strategy.
Okay, great. So if the applicant decided to build an extension, another couple of bedrooms, a bit down there, a bit more in the garden, at what point would it become commercial?
Thank you, Councillor. The use would continue to remain a residential one in the sense that it is a C-class use. Any sort of applications for extending it or intensify the use would be considered on their merits. But ultimately, how the site would operate, even if there was an increase in children, it would be the same operation in the sense that the purpose would be to raise the children and to have as close to a family upbringing as possible. Which is reflected in that use class. In effect, that's what differs it from say a school or educational use, or again from other genuinely commercial uses. As well, there are other examples within this district where dwellings have been converted without actually requiring formal planning permission, because the differences between the operation of a dwelling and a children's home was so minimal that they didn't actually constitute development in that regard.
Councillor Shelley.
Thank you. I'm only an irregular visitor to these committees. I notice there was a reference from the objectors to the site having come up for planning permission before. I'm just having a look at that, actually. That was only last year, so I'm assuming that didn't come to committee. It was turned down largely on the basis that it was an incursion. This is another house, a whole house, in addition to the existing one, into the countryside, and on grounds of highway safety. So there were some concerns there about the extra traffic that would be generated by a second house on the same site. I'm assuming automatically the report from there is considered as part of your assessment this time round, because it does sound like the new proposed use would generate more traffic, and so I'm interested that there seems to be a possible conflict there between the recommendations in those two different reports, and one which, I think you could possibly, or someone could possibly resolve, the new owner.
Could you frame a question?
I'm reaching towards the question. Given the very, very long sort of pointed cheese-shaped nature of the site, you could perhaps have another road access further down the site. So that's my question.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so there was an application previously considered by this council for a new dwelling, which and that was raised by objections as well as part of my consideration. So the officer report does in part address the fact that there was another application considered for a new dwelling. Ultimately, that is, a new dwelling with its own separate, it would form its own planning unit. And whilst I don't have the decision for that application in front of me, I believe one of the reasons for refusal did relate to highway safety, and the other related to the fact there was a new dwelling in the countryside which fails to comply with S4. Ultimately, those are materially different proposals. So, in terms of opportunity for expansion of the existing site or new accesses, potentially they can be considered in future, but that's not up for consideration at this time.
But it could be a condition that was imposed or added to.
It's not something that the Highway Authority considered to be necessary. They assessed the application and determined that there was not going to be any reason to substantiate refusal.
Any further questions, colleagues, before we move into debate? Right, we will move into debate. We have a recommendation, as the previous application. The recommendation is that this committee approves the application subject to conditions set down. Do we have anyone wanting to move? Councillor Hughes.
Yes, Chair, I would like to move this. I'm a bit upset by the way in which children who are already at some risk are being considered to be risks to local communities. I live not 50 yards from a 10-bed high dependency complex care service unit it's for women with learning disabilities, I'm quoting here, associated complex needs and who may have behaviours that challenge. We have never ever had any problem, no noise problem, no any other sort of problem with that unit. Putting it 150 yards away, meters away from other residential uses suggests that this is a perfectly acceptable location for children with difficult behaviour, and I would thoroughly recommend that we accept this, we approve this on officer's recommendations. We have a number of challenging planning decisions that we have to make. This may be one of them, I don't think it is, but we have other planning decisions that we will have to make in the near future which will be more difficult than this, associated with, as we all know, with various traveller families. And every time we come to one of these decisions, we have a lot of objections from people in the community. And we have to stand up for the people who have difficulties in keeping their lives together for whatever reasons they have, whether they're behavioural, whether they're because they haven't got the wherewithal intellectually, or whether they haven't got appropriate family backgrounds. So I would approve that. I would ask you all to look favourably on this application, because it's one that I think should go ahead. Thank you.
Councillor Maelstrom.
Thank you, Chair. I share Councillor Hughes' surprise, actually, at the debate that this has engendered. I mean, just looking at what use this property could be put to if we don't give permission for this change of use, it could still be occupied by a family with difficult teenagers. It could be occupied by foster parents who foster children with particular needs. It could be used as a second home and empty half the time. It could be used as a party house, all within the existing use class. We're talking about a change from residential use to a slightly different sort of residential use. I really hope that this committee grants this application and that the children who go there over the coming years and their carers and their visitors are welcomed warmly and kindly by the community.
Councillor Dobbs.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to make a very similar point to the one that Councillor Maelstrom has just added, but just to amplify those points which Edward made in his presentation. We've got a situation which could easily be just another family with difficult teenage children, except we've got far more levels of control over what's going on. You know, this will be shut down by Ofsted if things go pear-shaped. So it's not suddenly we're sort of taking on something which is high risk. We're just allowing a natural transition with plenty of safeguards in place. Now, I do echo what has been suggested.
Councillor Peacock.
I was going to say similar things, really. I think we do need children's homes in Derbyshire, and I do really like the idea of having them on a small, as if they're a family kind of basis. But I slightly wonder if we could have avoided some of the objections from the community if there'd been more reference to appropriate supervision and Ofsted in the consultation document. I'm just wondering if that could happen next time, that's all.
Councillor Shelley.
Thank you. I'm not opposed to the application in principle, far from it. I'm still niggling about this highways aspect, and just going back to that previous, I've got the actual wording of the previous officer report here, which obviously is talking about a second house on the same site, but it does say that would require vehicles to reverse onto Longford Lane blind to other road users, and there are also concerns that the emerging visibility would not be sufficient to ensure the safe way of highway users. So I don't know whether it is possible to put a condition on for a further assessment of vehicle access onto the site, given that this is likely to generate more traffic than for a single house. That's my only concern. That could be a proposal as an amendment.
Yeah, sorry, just through you, Chair, if I can come back on that point. I understand what the council is saying, but effectively, as already mentioned, that was a second dwelling on the site. There's no alteration to the vehicular access arrangement to this property. The properties that actually use, sorry, the cars that actually use the property in its current status could easily reverse out onto the site or reverse into the site to get access in a forward gear or reverse gear onto the site. So I think that's how our colleagues at the County Council have reached their point. The fact is you're not altering that arrangement, you're not altering that, you're not widening the vehicular access, it's just an existing vehicular access. And on that basis, there is no issue. Had there been the creation of a new vehicular access to this site, had it been an existing dwelling that didn't have a driveway, and it's putting a driveway in, then their conclusion may have altered or may have been slightly different. But the fact is it's not altering what exists in the current time. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Dobbs, you forgot to mention something.
No, it's just I was going to clarify from, if you've gone on the site visit, you would have seen that this actually has a rather excellent means of ingress and egress from it, and the point that the County Highways made about the other application is a totally different kettle of fish.
Councillor Butcher.
I'm still not entirely happy. I'm persuaded by a lot of what the other councillors have said. But the thing that bothers me, the two or three things. One is it's not a family. These are going to be carers. So you're going to have a shift work. So it's going to be 3 shifts probably a day. There are people going to be coming and going in much greater quantity than you would with a normal residential house. It's not going to be like a family with people who are well known in the village there necessarily, because it may not be the same carers every day. So it's more of that sort of operation. So it is much more of a commercial feel to it than simply a family house, even with foster children, with teenagers who cause difficulty. It isn't the same as that. Now, that course might be better as well, because they could be well managed, and they will have a number of carers, and they are described as being children with emotional stroke behavioural needs and learning difficulties. So they could be well managed, and it could be fine, and the village could be welcoming them. That's certainly true. I am struck, though, the Longford Parish Council are not at all persuaded by this. So it's not simply a matter of the objections from individuals. And that also really rather worries me if this is going to be an acceptable location. I am just a bit surprised there should be somewhere so remote for this facility. Clearly these things are needed, and I would support them generally, but I'm a bit unhappy about this. So I haven't quite decided, but I'm not as convinced as other people around the table it's the right thing to do. I'm probably mainly persuaded that the officers are in favour of it.
Any further contributions? Councillor Slack.
Has it been moved, Chair? Has it been moved to seconded, Chair?
It has indeed, Peter,
Right,
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with Councillor Hughes. I think this is a facility which can only... Yeah, there'll be a lot of movements. I know quite a few people who work in these places, and they don't come... They usually stop over for probably 36 hours, and then they change over. They don't continuously go and come each day. So, well, there will be quite a number of what they have normally. I think it's an ideal place for young people to come out into the countryside. I mean, there's footpaths, and some of these children probably never experienced countryside life, and I think it's great, really, if you get people coming there and enjoying the countryside, going out with on the footpaths. And, yeah, I think it's a good thing, and I support it, Chair.
Sir Burfoot, apologies for missing you out.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I've listened very carefully to the debate tonight, really carefully. I've listened to the applicant, I've listened to the objectors, and I do hope that they all think that, you know, this has been considered very seriously. But I think a very good, I can't remember who made it now, but it might have been you, Laura, backed up by Peter, but I'm not sure, that this house could be lived in by a family with what we might call quite disruptive children. There's absolutely nothing anybody could do about that, whereas in this case, the County Council and Ofsted will be monitoring it really carefully. So I think we can take that as read. So having listened to both sides, if you like, and listened to our excellent presentation by the officer, I will be supporting it.
Yeah, any further comments before we move to a vote? No, I too, as chair, are going to support the recommendation. Although I understand the reservations expressed by local residents, by the parish council. I think there are always reservations about something new coming into a community, and that's understandable. What I would say to the applicant, so if this application is approved, it's a little bit disappointing to me that you didn't take the opportunity to meet with the local residents and the local community before submitting the application. I think that would have gone a long way to assuaging some of their concerns. I do hope that if it is approved, you will take that on board and go out of your way to meet with local residents and try and reassure them personally, rather than just accept the reassurance of this committee. We have a recommendation to approve, which has been moved and seconded. Could we have all those in favour, please show? That is unanimous, so that application is approved. Does anyone want a 5-minute comfort break before we come on to what may be lengthy discussions on the next two applications? 5 minutes. 5 minutes, please. Can we take our places, please? Right, members, we're back in session now, please. Come on, and give me an excuse to use this. Right. We now have a pair of applications relating to the former Royal Bank of Scotland in the centre of Matlock on the Snitterton Road. Because it affects a listed building, a Grade 2 listed building, the first application we're going to consider is the listed building consent for both internal and external alterations and an extension and some demolition to create 16 new apartments. We'll then move on, once we've debated this and taken a decision, determine this application, we'll then move on to the planning application. They are related, but the listed building consent essentially relates to the, if you like, the architectural characteristics of the development. When we come on to the planning application, we'll also be looking at issues to do with parking, affordable housing, landscape, etc. So I know it's quite tricky too, but if we could focus initially on the first application on the listed building side of things. With no late representations, but we do have two speakers who are speaking against the application. Our first speaker is Mr. Ken Parker from the Matlock Civic Association. Ken, you have the normal 3 minutes to speak, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Civic Association strongly objects to the current proposals, and there are 4 main points I want to make. Firstly, the proposal includes the retention of the flat-roofed extension, which is not appropriate. Bank House is an elegant late 18th century Georgian building, one of very few buildings in Matlock from that era, but the existing 1950s flat-roof extension adversely affects the symmetry and style of the Georgian building. Bank House is a listed building, but the formal citation in the listing does not include this flat-roofed extension. If this extension did not exist and it was proposed to build it from scratch, almost nobody would think it was a good idea. Secondly, the original Georgian building should be the clear dominant element in the frontage to Derwent Way. This can be achieved by demolishing this 1950s flat-roofed extension and leaving a gap between the Georgian building and a new building subservient to it. However, this application is for the retention of the facade of the existing flat-roofed extension linked to a new flat-roof building. This flat-roofed appearance will occupy 2/3 of the frontage onto Derwent Way. There can be few more significant sites in Matlock. An elegant listed Georgian building behind a striking colonnade overlooking Matlock Bridge. The bridge is a scheduled ancient monument and a Grade 2 listed building itself, one of the top 8% of listed buildings in the country. The bridge is a heavily used pedestrian link across the town, so the view from the bridge is especially important. Third, the new building should be in character with the setting. Not only is it adjacent to the listed building, but it's a prominent site in a conservation area. It's proposed with a large flat roof, but it's pitched roofs that define Matlock's townscape, as reflected in the District Council's own conservation area appraisal. Therefore, the new building should have a pitched roof. Fourth, the Civic Association's views are echoed by the representations from the Georgian group. They are a statutory consultee and their representations should be given great weight. Their opinion has not been previously considered by this committee. It would be very unusual to reject the Georgian group's advice, and Richard Walker will be amplifying that point. So to conclude, the proposal is contrary to local plan policy PD2 because it doesn't sustain or enhance the Grade 2 18th century listed building and is not consistent with its setting in the Matlock Bridge Conservation Area. The current proposal should not be approved. The best interests of the listed building and the conservation area will be served by allowing the demolition of the 1950s extension and seeking a new design for a freestanding building reflecting the 18th century building, but in a subservient manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Very succinct. Thank you. Richard Walker is speaking next as a local resident. And against the application, Richard, you also have the 3 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'm a local resident and also a chartered town planner with over 30 years' experience of development management in planning. I fully support Mr. Parker's presentation on behalf of the Matlock Civic Association, but rather than repeat his comments, I focus on the relevant roles of the planning inspector and the Georgian group. In a previous proposal in 2020 on the same site, which went to appeal, the inspector, in her decision letter in March 2022, considered that the 50s extension should remain. The officer's report correctly takes account of the appeal decision. However, almost 2.5 years later, the local planning authority are also obliged to take account of any further material changes in circumstances. These are as follows. The Georgian group, which is a statutory consultee, were not consulted in respect of the application in 2020. The inspector was unaware of the Georgian group's thorough assessment in which they consider the retention of the 50s extension and the further extension to be, and I quote, harmful to both the setting of the listed building and the conservation area. The Georgian group also states that the 50s extension and further extension would more than double the length of the original 18th century dwelling. The resultant development would therefore considerably erode its setting and detract from views of the listed building's principal facade when viewed from the west, that's from the bridge, and the original 18th century building would effectively become part of a terrace rather than as an elegant detached villa. The Georgian group is the national authority on Georgian architecture in England and also a statutory planning consultee in respect to proposals affecting Georgian buildings. Therefore, it is considered that the council should give more weight to the recent views of the Georgian group rather than to those of the inspector in 2022. This important change in circumstances enables the council to refuse the current proposal without risk of an award of costs against them in the event of an appeal against the refusal of the current applications. The applicant's agent engaged with Matlock Civic Association at the pre-application stage and was prepared to go forward with a scheme which demolished the 50s flat roof extension and focus on a freestanding new building with a pitched roof. This all brings me to the same conclusion as the Georgian group. The applicant should be given the opportunity of submitting a less harmful scheme. If the applicant is unwilling to do so, then consent should be refused for this development. Thank you.
Should again very succinct. That's Sarah Arban is the case officer for this application. So Sarah, I'm going to apologise. We have the applicant to speak in favour of. I didn't bother to turn my page over. So we have James Boone, the agent. Sorry, not the applicant, the agent who's going to speak. And James, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. My name is James Boone, Director at James Boone Architects, designers and agents for this application. The former RBS Bank is Grade 2 listed and was the subject of a previous application by other parties. That was refused and then unsuccessful at appeal. This revised scheme overcomes the previous objections. There has been a collaborative approach to the application, taking on board comments raised and finding a way to suit all parties that can help save this important historic building. We've worked with the neighbour at number 12 Snitterton Road to mitigate any impact from the development to their situation, and they are now supportive and wish to see the scheme developed. Following a pre-app and also discussions with the Civic Association, as mentioned a minute ago, we've worked closely with the Conservation Officer and the Case Officer and listened to comments from various consultees throughout the process. A key element of this application has been the retention of the 1950s extension to the north of the original building. This is driven by the inspector's decision where the northern extension was considered, and I quote, to make a positive contribution to the listed building and the wider area. This view was supported by the Conservation Officer, and we've developed the project further from that stage. The new build extension beyond this is set back from the existing building to emphasise its subservience. It is contemporary in style, so as to be clearly read as a modern addition, but its simple form and materials will be both polite and subservient to the listed building. The continuation of the flat-roofed concept from the 1950s extension is considered appropriate and contributes to the subservience, allowing the original historic building to retain its architectural status and prominence. The design is sustainable on many levels, and it's especially its reuse of an existing building. It's a sustainable location near the town centre and its bus and railway stations, and highways have no objections to the scheme. Additionally, a green roof will also have solar panels generating electricity. The viability assessment concludes that there's no room for a Section 106 contributions, and this has been independently assessed. To conclude, the conversion of the listed building will renovate a prominent heritage asset, and with improvements to the landscape surrounding the building, bring it back into use. This will create 16 dwellings in a sustainable location where the council are unable to demonstrate a 5-year supply. Officers and consultees have stated that the proposal will preserve the listed building and its setting, and would preserve and enhance the conservation area. We'd like to thank the officers for working with us on this scheme, and trust you will support them in their recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, James, and apologies again for inadvertently missing you. Sarah, would you like to introduce the listed building application, please?
Yep, of course. So obviously it's a prominent listed building just off the town centre. I go into...
Can you speak into the microphone?
Sorry. So what we're looking at is obviously this is the listed building consent, and it's sought for alterations to the former bank in association with conversion to 4 apartments, demolition of parts of the listed building, including rear extension to the bank, the rear of the northern extension, and the 1961 Terrapin building, plus the erection of a new 2-storey block of 12 apartments. The conversion would include the removal of some minor internal walls, blocking of some internal openings, and a new single-storey infill to the rear of the building. The significance and fine 18th century staircase is to be retained and repaired, as is all the existing decorative plasterwork to individual spaces and areas. I can show you a few photographs of internal, because we didn't manage to go in. But there are some features within it that will be retained. Those are the sort of best I've picked out of my photographs. I was asked yesterday about the windows. The sash windows are to be repaired and retained with secondary glazing, concrete tiled roof covering to be removed and replaced with more traditional, appropriate natural slate, and a new external staircase is to be formed to access the attic. Three roof lights are proposed on the inner pitched roof of the southern wing. With the application, there was a detailed schedule of works to the listed building that was submitted and was reviewed by the Conservation Officer. Now, the Conservation Officer who has advised on this application has now retired, but he was heavily involved through many years since the appeal to get us to this point. But obviously, as he's reviewed that detailed schedule of works, that's reduced the number of specific conditions that we've had on that are, we're recommending on the listed building consent. Now to go on to the new build, which is possibly the contentious element. Plus, obviously, we're looking at have an appeal.
Sarah, can I introduce? Can you put an image of the property itself?
Yeah, I'll go back.
The members who aren't familiar with it.
It's a bit dark, isn't it? But do you want that sort of view, or that's the frontage? Yeah. So obviously, we've dealt with this application before. It was a different scheme in terms of it had much more development proposed within it. It proposed the removal of the extension, but obviously in the appeal, the inspector considered it made a positive contribution to the listed building and the wider area. So since the appeal, we've sought to negotiate a scheme which retains that. It does retain more than just the facade. It's only removing part of the rear wall. It's kept in its entirety because that was something that was, when it was assessed by an inspector, considered to be important to the significance of the listed building. So the conservation officer who worked with me on this case considered the proposed conversion and alterations and extensions to the main building would be acceptable and would not adversely affect or harm elements, features and spaces of significance to the listed building or its general external character and appearance. So subject to, obviously we've got the actual new build is set back from the extension quite significantly, and that's come through a number of amendments during the process. So it's setting back from the extension, and then the breaking up of the side wall is really important because obviously it's viewed from the railway bridge in relation to the existing listed building.
Can you just highlight for members which is the new build on that slide there? Sarah?
Oh, sorry. One here, those are the new build elevations. So what we're talking about is it's set back from the extension itself to add to that subservient and evolution of the building. And then what I'm saying is that on the side elevation where you would view it from the railway bridge, there's insets so that facade is broken up. So the conclusion is that the proposal as amended would preserve the listed building and its setting and would preserve and enhance the conservation area. Obviously I've discussed the Georgian Society, Georgian Group's comments. They're a national amenities society, so they are a statutory consultee, but the key one in this would be Historic England. They have chosen not to comment and to rely on a local conservation officer to give the advice on the listed building. Happy to take any questions.
Sure, there will be questions. David Hughes, I think you were first.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Chair. Two questions. The first is about car parking and EV charging. There are 14 car parking.
Can we leave that, David, till we come on to the planning application?
Okay, yeah, I'll leave that one. I'll bring that one forward. The other one is about the status of the planning inspectorate's decision, given the input from the Georgian Society. And if we refuse this on the basis that the Georgian Society had strongly objected to the application and felt that the 20th century block was not part of the listed building and detracted from the listed building, how would the planning inspector view that? I know you can't prejudge the planning inspector, but would we have a chance, basically?
Obviously, my professional recommendation is that I think this scheme, I've worked on it for quite so many months, is at a point where I consider it to be acceptable. And, because I've made that recommendation, I wouldn't look to defend any refusal to the planning inspectorate. I think it's a sound recommendation that I'm making to you.
Yes, I don't deny that. I think that the architect has done an extremely good job. within the constraints that the planning inspectorate gave. And I think what you have done is to work within the constraints the planning inspectorate gave. But now we have a renewed objection which postdates your work with the applicant. So this isn't anything to do with, and it's from a statutory consultee. Therefore, if we went ahead and refused, can we have any confidence that the planning inspectorate might agree with us?
I
think David's asking more of a procedural question, I think, so I think it merits an answer from Sean or Sarah.
Yes, sorry, thank you, Chair. If I can go back to you, Councillor. I mean, the difficulty is that as the, I've just been looking at the colleague's laptop, iPad now, the Development Management Procedure Order, in its various iterations, it dates back to 2015, but has had a number of renewals, does clearly set out those consultees that are statutory and non-statutory. So the number of consultees or the number of statutory consultees. And certainly Historic England's mentioned there. The Georgian Society is not. So the way in which the planning inspectorate, I mean, again, I'm only speculating here, this carries nowhere at all. The planning inspectorate will have viewed the previous case, have seen what the Historic England have said, and that's what they've based their decision upon. It's very difficult for the authority to go back and effectively, what we are doing now would be to effectively challenge the inspectorate on their previous decision. The period of time to do that or raise that question is long gone on that particular decision. So we've got to work in, and as we have done, as the officer said, within those parameters that have been outlined to us by the planning inspectorate. And that's what's formed the basis of the report. I mean, I can't sit here and tell you you wouldn't have any grounds with the inspectorate, but obviously, given the fact the inspectorate have made a decision on what they believe is the most relevant information, I think it will be difficult.
Thank you, Sean. And as I said, I think the architect's done an extremely good job here, and Sarah, I think you've done an extremely good job in conjunction in getting it to this stage. I only wish that we'd not had that planning inspectorate decision. Thank you very much.
Councillor Archer.
It's a related question, but just a little bit extra. A lot of what I was going to ask has already been covered by that first one. But the issue of the Georgian group, and we're obviously placing our conservation officer's view ahead of the Georgian group's view. Would it not be normal practice for the conservation officer to consult with the Georgian group before reaching their opinions, their views? I think from what the speaker said that there wasn't that consultation. So can I just check with basically whether our conservation officer did consult with the Georgian group? Did the Georgian group have input to our conservation officer to assist them in making their recommendation?
That's not how it kind of works. I am the officer that consult the Georgian group, and I look at I balance the arguments. It's the conservation officer as a consultee to me as an officer, so I balance those arguments, as I've said. So it's in the round looking at, obviously, the appeal decision that I've got. You know, they fundamentally don't agree that the extension should stay, but in all of these decisions, it's judgment, and you know, I as a planning officer, I'm looking at the appeal decision, and that was my route forward with any application.
Be fair to all parties, I think Councillor Archer is actually asking whether the Georgian group were consulted on the application.
Well, they were consulted, but obviously they didn't have consultation with my conservation officer. It came through me.
Sir Dobbs.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just to clarify, the point's kind of been made. In the hierarchy of whose opinion matters most, the inspectors at the top and the Georgian Society are somewhere underneath. Am I right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Burfoot.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm plugging this issue of the Georgian group because it was mentioned tonight, and I did know that I did know of the Georgian group, so I went on their website, and it clearly says that this is the National Authority on Georgian Architecture and is a statutory planning consultee. So I need to know whether that's true or whether they're just assuming that they're a statutory consultee. I don't know what the facts are there. So were in addition to that question, were they consulted in 2022? And if not, does that mean, following on from that, that the inspector was unaware of the Georgian Group's assessment when she made her decision? Bit complicated, but that's the question.
Sorry, if I may, Chair, through you. Just coming back to that point, I mean, what I read a few moments ago in terms of the Development Management Procedure Order identifies a number of consultees and statutory consultees. Upon that list, upon that reading from that actual document, it doesn't identify the Georgian Society as a statutory consultee. However, as part of that document, it does say that an authority can choose to consult with other consultees on applications, which obviously the Georgian Society would form one of those. One of the points you raised there about whether or not the inspector was aware of or not aware of what the Georgian Society had said, again, that's sort of drifted into the field or realm of challenging what the inspector's decision is, and I think I would rather not comment on that for obvious reasons. I don't think necessarily we should continue on that veil on that particular point, that would be my advice. But in terms of going back to what we are working within, I mean, we've got as Sarah's kindly said, that the inspector's decision effectively gave an outline. The conservation officers worked within that with the applicant. We put forward a scheme for members' consideration, which they're more entitled to make whatever recommendation or attribute more weight to other comments than officers have laid out in their report. So I think the report is balanced and there is a recommendation in front of members. Now, obviously it's up to you, unfortunately up to yourselves to debate. Sorry, it's up to yourselves to debate whether or not you choose to agree or disagree with the officer's report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sean. Councillor Peacock.
I was just after some clarification. Which part of the building is listed? I was assuming it was just the 18th century part, but what people have just been saying, does it apply to the 1950 extension? But if it doesn't, is it not part of this? Because we're just doing the listed building consent now, aren't we?
The list in my report, I'm obviously getting advice from the conservation officer who considered it to be curtilage listed because it was actually physically attached to the listed building.
Is that your answer?
Well, I was just surprised because we used to live in a listed house and it was literally only half the house that was listed. But that's fine, just so I understand it.
Councillor Buttle.
Thanks. Well, this business about the hierarchy and the planning inspector being at the top, I think we're at the top, actually. I think we're at the top and it's up to them to agree with us or disagree with us, but we're the people who make the decision.
Frame question.
Question, right. Right, we're bringing a current and local perspective to what's happening on the other side of the roundabout. And I think that we deserved a better set of options than some faux extension on what is actually a beautiful building. And if it's, I don't want to ascribe any blame to anybody at all because, you know, I have no idea quite how we got here, but if we ended up with a planning inspector that was underinformed and we've ended up having to play a game where there was a mistake further down the line, I think it's our job to actually spot that issue and say, right, we've got a historic building, we need to look after it, it's beautiful, we can leave it there, we can put another building on the side if that's going to bring it back into use, and fantastic. So my question is, if we don't grant planning permission for this section of the application, what happens to the second section? like for the actual application for the detail, would we take that forward in this discussion, or would we just say, right, well, they can go away and start again because we're not giving it an approval?
I would think that if you've refused listed building consent, you can't then go and approve the full permission. So they are a joint application, really, as far as that goes.
So would we be obliged to bring our expertise to the second section of this application, or would we just say, right, we're not going to give it listed building consent, and so like away it goes?
I think just to add on to that point, what Sarah was trying to get at, I mean, were members to disagree with the report that's in front of them, we would need material planning reasons to refuse this. Those material planning reasons must then follow suit. If the listed building consent fails, then in theory the full application has to fail. So again, for that particular application, you would have to present meaningful reasons, substantial reasons for refusal based on policy. Now obviously the officers have put reports in front of you to recommend approval for both. So we would need from yourselves valid reasons to reject both applications, if that's the way members chose to go. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Shelley.
Thank you for that clarification. Just pursuing the queries that Mr. Walker brought before us then. So if we're talking about further material changes, in your opinion, would the inspector's lack of awareness of the Georgian group's view potentially constitute a further material change?
I couldn't comment on that. I couldn't comment which inspector would or how they would form their opinion. However, it's very unusual for one inspector to another to come form a different opinion based on a former colleague or current colleague's decision. It's not unheard of, but it is unusual.
Councillor Hughes, you had a further question.
Yeah, I'm sorry to come back again, but can I put a counter argument? If we asked the developer to come back with a scheme which didn't link the buildings together, and they agreed to do that, would we have problems with the planning inspector then? Could we defend a decision where we approved a building that wasn't linked to the 18th century building?
I mean, effectively this evening, what we would have to do as members would be to vote down the recommendation in front of you, refuse it for material planning reasons for both the full application and listed building consent, and only at that point the applicant may well choose to come back with a revised scheme, but then again, conversely, they could go to what's probably going to be an informal hearing or public inquiry based on this application and actually appeal the decision. There's no guarantee that they would come forward with that application. So that is the difficulty. I mean, they may well want to enter into an application and twin track a brand new application as well as appealing the current application were it to fail. But obviously, again, I'm speculating on that one, Councillor.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. But we could actually pass. We could actually do that. We could have we could consider one where the buildings aren't linked.
Only if we get an application. I mean, we can't, obviously, we have got nothing in front of, all we've got in front of us today is the application that's shown on the screen.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Maelstrom.
Thank you, Chair. Shut me up. This is completely, if it needs to be, this is completely irrelevant to this application, actually, but I've got two concerns here. One is for you, Chair and Vice Chair, and one's for the Development Management Department. These pictures are just not fit for purpose. This projector is not fit for purpose. And this is a complex application which really illustrates the problem really well, which is why I'm raising it now, although I have moaned about it before. I wasn't on the site inspection, but I think everybody must be in the same difficulty in peering at these pictures and trying to work out what's old, what's new. So for the development management team, I would ask, is there anything you can do to ask applicants to provide better pictures, perhaps computer-generated coloured pictures, rather than these sketch type old-fashioned drawings? And I know this sort of technology is out there now, but we still seem to be looking at very difficult to read sketches. So is there anything that you can do to improve the quality of the images that we get on applications?
I mean, in short, we can look at that. I can certainly speak to Democratic Services about if we could possibly sharpen up the image, but I think it's worth bearing in mind that the application's been with the authority for some time. Those images are on the website. They are quite clear. You can pull them up on the computer or on tablets. So it's difficult to ask for something that hasn't already been submitted. I mean, there is sufficient information.
At this stage in this application, that's not a runner, but in terms of future, future applications, the way we handle things going forward, is there anything we can do?
Yes, that could be part of a local validation checklist, which we are working on.
Yeah. And the other question is, what can we do to improve the tech? I mean, can we not have monitors in this day and age rather than an overhead projector? The officers need to be able to point to things, and is there something that we could in this committee do? Well, that's better, definitely. To get some better tech, particularly for this committee, but probably useful for other committees as well.
So I think Tommy wants to come back on that.
Yeah, just through you, Chair. Yeah, we have got a business case together, and money has been put aside in the capital programme to upgrade the tech available in this room to make it better for the use for hybrid meetings and just for being able to see things better. So work is in progress, and it will be happening.
Does that include electronic monitors, big monitors, as opposed to
we are looking at the possibility of putting in screens rather than projectors, but these projectors are well past their use-by date, and so that is anything that replaces them will be much better quality.
Fabulous, bring it on.
Laura, I think your comments are well noted by the Chair and officers. Our Vice Chair would like to make a point.
Thank you. And it is a comment really, but thank you for that, Laura, because I know you've said it before, and I think everybody around this table actually agrees with you about that, but it is work in progress. Take your points very seriously. I just wonder whether, in this day and age, is it not possible to have a video of it, of sites? I'm not saying every site, but certainly really important sites. But then I suppose someone would say, well, what's an important site? They're all important sites, but videos, would that not be possible? Because and I absolutely realise that not everybody can go on site visits, but site visits, they do make it obvious what we're talking about. But I accept that not everybody can go on them. I really do accept that.
That's the Butcher. It's been waving your hand about. Right. If there are no further questions, we're going to move into debate. Just by way of summary of those set of really pertinent questions, I think it's fair to say that the scheme we're considering has been developed within the framework which was set out by a previous planning inspector's decision. Clearly, there are alternative schemes, but we have one scheme before us which is prepared within that context and that framework, and we have to take a judgment as to whether, if members think it is worthy of being refused, we would have to be clear as to what demonstrable and substantial significant harm to the existing listed building that this new scheme would bring about. So that is the bar which is set for us to take our decision. Not, if you like, whether there is a different scheme which we would prefer, but whether the scheme we've got before us is harmful to the existing listed building complex. But we're in debate. We have a recommendation from officers to approve the recommendation. There is a condition attached to that related to the planning application, which relates to an unresolved issue from the Environment Agency, but that doesn't materially affect the listed building application. So over to you, colleagues. We have a recommendation from officers to approve. Councillor Peacock.
So I think I possibly, in contrast with a lot of my colleagues, I would like to move to approve this because I think I see why the inspector came up to their conclusion. I hadn't realised that that extension was a 1950s extension until I looked at this. And I like the way, and I see what the applicant was saying about it being together but separate from the main Georgian building. And then to put a modern one slightly further back, it's like you're walking through history as you walk past I really like it. So I'd like to move to support it.
Lucy, Councillor Slack.
Yeah, I'll second that, Chair. On site visits yesterday, the Georgian building was more prominent. The flat roof area, you can't see it because it's a flat roof area. And I think, yes, I agree with the officers. I think they've got it do it right, really. I think Georgian building isn't in any way pushed back. It's the forward building you look at first of all. So, yeah, I agree with the officer's recommendation.
Are you seconding?
I second it, Chair, yeah.
Councillor Lees.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I would have seconded it. I was on one of the first site visit we had some 2 years ago, I think, 3 years ago, whatever it was, and going to it yesterday, it's sad to see how the building and etc. has deteriorated in its time in that short space of time. And I think we're going on about a flat roof and all this and a new building. Old and new, in my opinion, does go together. It brings out the old with having the new behind it. So I'm fully supportive of it.
Any further contributions? Councillor Shelley.
I listened to everything and I'm torn. I went and on Saturday I went and had a very nice peas and pie. Sat on the benches on the other side of the bridge, and even with the tree in its that giant tree, what is a willow or whatever it is, which dominates the view there at the moment, you can still see this. And I was even further away than the bridge, and I looked at it and I thought, yeah, I mean absolutely, you would never get permission to build something like that now on the side. And I'm afraid it does. The existing 1950s extension does stand out. We're not talking about changing that materially other than filling it in, but I unfortunately think that filling it in will make that more prominent, and that's the situation at the moment with the vegetation quite dense. So I went for a wander around the whole thing because I knew I couldn't make the site visit, and I am troubled by this idea of the terrace being built up, because this is a gateway view for many people coming into Matlock. And as I say, at the moment, part of that is obscured. But you imagine what it will be like when it's revealed in all its, I'll use the word glory, to people. And it will be even longer than that existing 1950s extension. So this is the reason for my extreme troubledness. As a sort of semi-professional historian as well, I do get exactly what Councillor Peacock is saying there, and I thought, well, if you're going to knock down the 1950s, but you might as well knock down the bank entrance on the other side as well, and just be left with a pure Georgian building. But we don't know. We've got no pictures of what it looked like when it was first built, and what the landscaping. I don't think we have anyway. Was like around it. So we are, we're in a difficult position here. I'm also torn because, yes, the longer it goes on in its current state, the more vulnerable it is. I would dearly love to impose conditions, which I think is probably the thing that comes before us, on having some sort of hipped roof. But then I think that in itself will be a pastiche of history. So that's where I am at the moment. I can genuinely see both sides and want to remain sitting on the wall as long as it's humanly possible.
I'm going to make a political joke there, but I don't. Apologies. Councillor Archer.
Yeah, I'm in a strange position of agreeing with both sides of an argument, which is a bit of an odd one, really. I personally agree with the view of the Georgian group from my personal perspective. Living in Ashbourne and used to teach a study on local history and Georgian architecture to my students. I do think it would be better to get rid of the 50s extension. So I'm in agreement with what they're saying, but I'm here not as a history teacher. I'm here on the planning committee, and I think in terms of the fact that we've got inspectorate decision and our officers and the architect and the applicant have worked so closely together based on having a planning inspectorate decision already is a foundation for that work. And then I think in addition to that, what we've got in front of us will be better than what we've got now. So it is an improvement on what's there now, in my opinion, even though I think it'd be better overall to do what the Georgian group recommend. So on balance, therefore, I think as a planning committee, we will need to, well, I certainly will be supporting the recommendation, but that doesn't mean I don't have a lot of sympathy for the Georgian group's view, because I do.
Mr. Dobbs.
Thank you, Chair. I think the key with listed buildings, especially ones which are crumbling, is you must find a way to prevent them falling further into disrepair. And I think we have a way forward on this, and I think we need to grasp it, because otherwise it'll be 8 years with it not crumbling away, and we won't have anything, and the gains will be non-existent, and we will have ignored a possibility, and I think we just need to grasp this one.
Mr. Burfoot.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm joining Councillor Shelley in being extremely troubled by this one. It is a significant application, and it's a really important site in the centre of Matlock. So I'm finding it really difficult, because it's difficult for us as the planning committee. I think it's been, I'm not sure whether difficult for Sarah is the word, but it's taken a lot of work. But I do agree with the Georgian group in what they're saying, but I also appreciate that that's quite how this is going to pan out. What I'm not a fan of are flat roof buildings in our town centre of Matlock. Particularly in this part of Matlock, there are no flat roofs. They're all hitch roofs. And I've seen some of the flat roof developments that we've got and in the town, and the more I see them, the more I don't like them. So I'm not sure that the flat roofs are appropriate. Now we're going to end up with 2/3 of that line being flat roofed. But I am really struggling with this, because I don't want to see this building deteriorate even more. I would have hoped that somehow we would have been able to have some kind of acceptable scheme that could have been worked out with the applicant, based on the fact that these comments from the Georgian group are quite telling, actually. You know, they're there to assess Georgian buildings, and as the experts, I take on board what they're saying, but we are where we are, and I really want to listen to what more people have got to say. I'm really struggling with this one.
All right, you can listen to David Hughes now.
Well, I'm going to vote for it for the reasons that Lucy gave, which is that you can actually read the development of the building, and so it's placed in its overall historical context, and the new extensions do the new modern extension is appropriate in scale and is set back, so it's subservient. So while I would prefer the buildings to be separate, I can live with this. What I would ask, though, is that we have a number of really good buildings in Matlock and the area around it, but we're losing sight of them. So this is one where we probably will lose some of the sight of the 18th century building because of the adjacent buildings next to it and the tree. And but at the other end of Hall East Park, there's a house built in, or a facade built in 1622, and I think the house behind it is probably earlier. And there's been a terrace of houses built, they're under construction at the moment. Perfectly respectable terrace of houses, but they hide that 1622 building behind it. So we're losing sight of that. In Lumsdale, there's a mill building, which is a rather nice mill building. And again, there's a terrace or a number of houses being built in front of it. Good use of the plot, but we lose the sight of the older buildings. So we're losing that historical context. So I plea to planners that we consider the way in which these historical buildings are displayed and modern buildings are put around them. And we have the opportunity to do that in terms of planning policies. But I'll vote to approve this one.
Any further comments to help our Vice Chair out? Councillor Buttle, you will.
Finally, I suppose I want to apologise to Matlock for voting for this. I don't think we should be doing this. I think we're in a bad place, and I'm very sad to see we're here. But it just seems to be like we're losing what could be something which absolutely changed the way people see Matlock as they come into it, and I think that's a sad loss. But I think we've just got to go with be pragmatic. Thank you.
Further comments for anyone before we? Right, that was a very well-informed debate, colleagues. Thank you. I will also vote in favour of the development, and I congratulate our officers and the developers for working together on producing a scheme which it is evident doesn't satisfy everybody, doesn't satisfy some of the key stakeholders in Matlock for various reasons, which I think we can all understand. But what I hope that if we do vote in favour of this application, this recommendation, then we do so on the basis that what we will get will make a positive contribution to Matlock. So if we're looking forward to another 250 years in post-21st century-ism, people will be referring to in that time, then they can say that this was something which they will list in the year 22 something. So on that basis, as I said, we have a motion to approve the recommendation subject to the clause you see there. It's been seconded. Can we have all those in favour, please? Or against? And do we have any abstentions? That's good. It's good that we've no abstentions. It's good to see people taking a view. Could you read the result out, please, Tommy?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We've got 9 for, 4 against, and 0 abstentions.
And therefore, the listed building consent application is approved. Right, going on to the planning application now, for the same scheme. I don't know whether our two speakers, do you wish to make a further contribution? No. Sarah, do you want to introduce the planning elements of the scheme, please? Those which you think are pertinent for the committee to consider.
Yep, apologies for the plans again, they're really quite small. So I'm trying to talk about the car parking. Obviously, you've got 4 apartments within the existing building and 12 within the new. Overall, you've got 14 spaces, 11 to the rear and 3 angled spaces to the front. The Highways Authority have obviously stated that there's a shortfall in 2 spaces. It's not 1 per apartment, but due to its town centre location, they're not objecting because obviously it's accessible by other means of transport. There's an electric charging vehicle points and solar panels on the new building's flat roof. We've got proposed mitigation of surface water through SUDS in terms of a green roof that would link to planters on the sort of balconies of the, I'd call them balconies, but they're planters on the side elevations. It's achieving some sort of green space for each apartment, and they're fed by the grey water system. And then the remainder goes to a soakaway. So the surface water drainage into an attenuation tank at the front of the buildings, and that drains down into where the road, into the road where the existing connections are. In this, obviously, there are no developer contributions, there's no affordable housing proposed or any sort of open space contributions. We have had some viability information submitted with the application, and in the process of the application we've had that independently assessed. We had a consultant who looked at the viability as part of the appeal. The same one has looked at the new figures as part of this scheme and concludes that it's not viable when you don't even include those requirements. Another point I'd make is obviously we've got the EA objection, a report is being commissioned to provide the preliminary risk assessment that's required, and it's to do with proposals where obviously the EA in the previous application didn't mention this element. They are now mentioning it, and so it was questioned as part of the application, and that's where I made the recommendation that a risk assessment will be done, the EA will be consulted on again, and if there's any major changes to the scheme, it would have to come back to committee. I've gone through how long we...
Sorry, sir, can you just, for members who are part way, could you just clarify what the issue the Environment Agency are concerned about?
It's to do with groundwater contamination because it's based on the site situated on an aquifer, which is, water's held in the rocks and is used for drinking water. So it's protecting any contamination. So they have to do a report in which to sort of provide evidence that there's no contamination as part of the scheme. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Dobbs.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on the EA query about this limestone formation. That's quite extensive. I believe it has just a little appearance in this bit of Matlock. But have the Planning Authority had any other comment about this, bearing in mind that it will exist in other places in Derbyshire Dales? Have we ever had this sort of query about bedrock contamination before?
Not in an application I've dealt with in Matlock, no. No, I mean, a principal aquifer is defined as a strategically important rock that has high permeability and water storage capacity, and they're linking it with being near contaminated sites like the Corder Quarry, but with and the bus station, which are a significant, quite a distance away from this. So we have questioned why they're requiring it, but they're firm on it. So this is, the kind of way forward that we found.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask my question about car parking spaces and EV charging? There are 14 car parking spaces and 16 apartments, which means there's less than one per apartment, and so there's clearly no visitor parking either. And yet there are 2 EV charging points, so there are 16 spaces for cars altogether and 16 apartments, and 2 of them have been dedicated to EVs. So by 2035, all new cars are going to be EV, and that's not very long away. That's 11 years. Isn't it about time we put some cables in at least for charging points in all of those car parking spaces? And doing it now would cost next to nothing. Doing it later will cost an awful lot of money and require digging up the tarmac. So can we condition that all the car parking spaces have EV charging points, or at least the cabling to EV charging points? Although I think having the same type of EV charger at each point would have some sort of design integrity, and rather than and then that would give us 16 car parking spaces, not 14, and would meet the requirement of 1 per apartment.
Obviously, that's not before us. That's not proposed as it stands, and I'm struggling to find a policy basis for it in PD7 because it's quite vague in terms of what it requires. I think that's a matter for you as members to discuss whether you add such a condition.
But it is a condition that could be easily. I mean, all I gave my electrician was that. Can you put in a car charging point for me, please? And they did. I didn't have to give any more information. I think that's all we would require. We could say 7 kilowatt car parking space, or an 11 kilowatt car parking EV charger, or something like that. But
my point is, is there a policy requirement? And I'm saying, because in any planning condition, it's got to pass certain tests, and that is one it wouldn't pass, in my mind.
But if I could add to that, Chair, for you. Sarah's correct. I mean, there isn't a policy backstop to ask for that at this moment in time. There may well be as part of the new local plan coming forward. However, if members were to ask for that as a condition to be added to the decision, then that's something that obviously we could add. Yes.
I think as a point of information, we do have supplementary planning guidance on climate change, which refers specifically to charging points on new developments. So although it's not within the local plan itself, we do have supplementary guidance. Further questions, colleagues? Councillor Lees, do you have a question? Questions, or do we want to move? Councillor Burford? Yeah. Right, we'll move into debate. We have, again, a recommendation to approve the application subject to the condition relating to the, well, we have an application, we have a proposal to delegate authority to the development manager to approve the application, provided that the issue raised by the Environment Agency can be satisfactorily dealt with, and an assurance from our planning officer, Sarah, that if that raised any issues relating to the design and layout of the building, that would be brought back to the committee for consideration. Just to remind colleagues, although we've approved the listed building application, we are at liberty to take a different view on the planning application. But do we have anyone who would wish to put forward a proposal? Councillor Hughes?
In the absence of anybody else, I'll move officer recommendation with the condition that all the car parking spaces have EV charging points so that we can establish 16, the same number of car parking spaces as we have apartments, and we safeguard the development against future requirement or developing requirement.
Would you like to suggest a justification for that?
Well, in terms of the amenity of the residents, who will not be able to charge their electric vehicles as they acquire them over the next 10 years.
And perhaps
Can I reference BD7 then?
yeah. Well, my suggestion would be, so Sean is going to speak in a moment. As I said, we do have supplementary planning guidance, which is quite specific on this, so perhaps some reference to that would be helpful.
Okay, in reference to the SPD on climate change.
Sorry, Chair, if I can just come through. I think I've beaten Sarah to it. The scheme itself, actually, in totality, there's 14 car parking spaces. There's not 16, or there's not 2 that are dedicated to EV charge points. There's 14 parking spaces, of which 2 of those currently are proposed to have EV charging points. And just forgive me, make sure I've actually written down correctly. Was the suggestion of the condition to lay in the infrastructure to be able to adapt those additional car parking spaces, or was it put in the charging points now?
Well, I would prefer to put in charging points now, but I think adapting to enable the adaptation later is sufficient.
So the cable points or cable laid in, but
yeah,
it doesn't necessarily have to have the above ground points at this stage.
Right, we have a proposal from Councillor Hughes. Would someone like to second that? Councillor Buttle, I think you were first.
I'd like to fill in a bit of the gap on the climate change SPD while we're at it. The guidance requires us to consider reducing the use of energy and increasing efficiency. And electric vehicles are more efficient and they use less energy. So I think that's perfectly demonstrable, and we should insist on it for all those parking spaces. So I'm supporting that and saying I'm seconding David's suggestion.
Councillor Lees, I think you're next.
Yeah, I support it as well, Chair. I think the EV charging situation will sort itself out through the new building regs, to be honest, because all new builds now have to have an EV charging point anyway, so it should sort itself out, in my opinion. But I do have a bit of a thing on this aquifer, because it relates to Eam limestone. Is Eam limestone different to any other limestone? Because normal limestone doesn't absorb water, so I'm a bit confused on that one.
Probably better, actually. Councillor Burfoot.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just be clear what we're saying about the charging points? Are we saying the charging points themselves must be there, or we're saying that the infrastructure must be there? I'm not clear what we're asking for.
Chair, I was the expensive part is laying the cable, particularly when it's going from one over some distance, as it will, and so one would expect the cable to go from the meter for each apartment to a particular car parking space or in some such way. So there'd be, and that would be an expensive thing to do later, but it's a cheap thing to do when the development is happening. Putting in the car charging point is a few £100, and that's not going to be expensive.
I think David is saying to condition to require the installation of appropriate infrastructure to allow the subsequent installation of electric vehicle charging points. Mr. Dobbs.
Thank you, Chair. Just a minor point, if I was going to second it, which I missed, but I would have added that condition 10, I note our Environmental Health Department have commented on air quality in the area, along Dale Road, in fact. The condition that Karen actually wrote is actually slightly a better set of words than condition 10 as it stands, so I would recommend picking up on Karen's actual words if that's possible. Thank you.
You want to comment on that, Sarah?
I'll check, but I would have thought that it may have come from Karen, but that's fine. If I can amend the wording in consultation with her, that would be perfectly fine.
That would be fine. I mean, hers is just slightly more prescriptive, that's all.
Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I perfectly agree with David Hughes. That infrastructure is vital to put the installation in ready for the... as we go along, we can keep adding the charges on then, but the infrastructure's got to be there, definitely. I totally agree with this application, but I am disappointed that there's not an affordable housing grant here. Yeah, I'd expect it to be an affordable housing grant for a project like this. I mean, affordable housing and social housing is again losing out, and we continuously keep doing this. A few months ago, across here, they said we couldn't afford affordable housing grants, and we accept this when we shouldn't really be accepting. We should be standing up and saying you need to have an affordable housing grant on these projects. So I will support the project, but I am disappointed in that area. Thank you, Chair.
Any further contributions? We're going to move to a vote. I'll just comment on Councillor Slack's point, which I think we'd all agree with, but I have looked in detail at the viability assessment, and I can understand the rationale, but I think this is an issue which affects not just this proposal, but many brownfield or redevelopment applications of this nature. And I think it's something we as members are going to have to look at carefully when we review our local plan to see if there are any measures which we can put in place whereby we can find ways of supporting the provision of affordable housing where a viability assessment says that it's not required through planning policies. I think that's a corporate discussion we'll need to have, because you're right. It's not a good place to be in where we have a development which we're proud of, but doesn't meet our priority commitment to providing housing for people who aren't necessarily able to afford these sort of apartments. Right, we have the proposal seconded to delegate authority to the development manager to approve this application, subject to the resolution of the Environment Agency, with the additional condition put forward by Councillor Hughes that electric vehicle charging point infrastructure is provided to each parking space. Can we have all those in favour? Councillor Reid.
Can we just be clear before we go to the vote, Chair? Are we talking of a slow charge EV charge or a rapid charge? Because the expense of putting the rapid charge in is going to be astronomical for that size development.
I'm thinking of 7 kilowatt charging. That's sufficient for overnight charging.
That would be called rapid as opposed to ultra rapid. Yeah, okay. That clear. Right, all those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you, colleagues. My apologies to my Vice Chair. All those against, please show. Any abstentions? So we have one abstention, so that proposal is carried and the authority is delegated. Do we want to carry on? No. So we need to have a vote to carry on. Would someone like to move an extra 30 minutes? Councillor Dobbs? Councillor Archer? All those in favour of carrying on for another 30 minutes? Feel free to say no if you want to. I'll wait for the moment when someone says no. Anyone against? No, okay, another 30 minutes. Right, our final application this evening is in Wyaston Village. And we have some late representations here. Should take a couple of minutes to read. Item 5.6. Okay, and we have one speaker for this application. We have Mr. Luke Gittins, who is the agent, speaking in favour of the application, unsurprisingly. Mr. Gittins, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to readdress the committee. I'm Luke Gittins, I'm a Director of By Design and the applicant agent. I'll be concentrating my time just to discuss what the applicant has done since the June committee meeting, where the application was deferred for drainage design. It was my understanding as minuted that the deferring was for drainage only, and all other aspects of the application were acceptable. Following the meeting, we organised and carried out 3 soakaway tests across the site. The tests were carried out in accordance with the British Standard Guidelines. 2 tests didn't drain, and 1 test results were unsatisfactory for use as a soakaway, although the existing property is using soakaways for its drainage. Based on the results, the design was prepared by a qualified drainage engineer. The design is based around attenuating the surface water on site and discharging to the main combined drains. The size of the attenuation tank is sized to accommodate all new roof areas and all hard standing. The tank will discharge to the main drains via a hydro brake to slow down the flow into the drains to the lowest speed available at 2.5 litres per second. We submitted our own consultation / developer inquiry, whatever you want to call it, to Severn Trent. Severn Trent confirmed that the principle of discharging foul and surface water to the main drains was acceptable. We also requested confirmation that the drains had the capacity to take the runoff from the site. Severn Trent confirmed they will allow a controlled discharge of 2.5 litres per second via a flow control device to discharge to the 225mm combined sewer manhole number 4401. Following the design and confirmation from Severn Trent, we approached the next door neighbour, Jonathan Edwards, who addressed the committee at the June meeting. We explained in detail the principle of the drainage design and how it would work. Mr. Edwards was happy in principle with the design and has subsequently written to the local authority lifting his objection on drainage grounds. We believe we have now satisfied the request from the last committee meeting and believe the scheme design will offer the residents of Wyaston the peace of mind that the development will cope with all surface water without putting any uncalculated pressure on the existing drainage system. The foul drains will also connect separately to the combined drain, connecting into the main drains with, so the foul drains will connect into, new foul drainage will connect into the combined drain on the road as well, separately to the attenuation. So there's no treatment plants or septic tanks similar to the FIRS development at the other end of the village, so there'll be no issues with any form of contamination onto the land, which has been an issue, I believe, down there because we're going into the sealed and controlled main drains with Severn Trent. That's everything. I respectfully ask for you to approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gittins. Before I ask Sarah to come in, just for absolute clarification on the previous decision or resolution of the committee was that the application deferred such that the applicant is requested to supply a report from an independent drainage consultant with further consultation to take place with the lead local flood authority and the Severn Trent Water. We did not formally express a view on the merits of the application itself. Sarah, would you like to introduce it?
Obviously, we went on site again, so we're looking at 4 detached dwellings in a 5th tier settlement, which has no defined settlement boundary. Officers consider the development to constitute infill, which is acceptable within these settlements. And the additional 3 dwellings provide a significant public benefit when the district cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. I've just got a verbal update that on condition 1 we're mentioning plan 20A. That included the original soakaways, so that needs to be taken off that condition. Happy to take any questions.
Right, questions, colleagues. Bear in mind we have debated this application previously. We reopen it to debate. Questions, Councillor Archer.
And just it seems like we've actually got somewhere here with this deferral to get more information about drainage, which is something we struggled with in terms of getting direct comment from local flood authorities and so on. So is this the process we've been through here? Is this something that we can take as good practice when we have our concerns, as we almost certainly will, about future applications for related to drainage and soakaway and sewer capacity and so on? Because we actually have a specific response from Severn Trent Water. Just can we learn from this and use this in future applications, do you think, based on how this one's gone?
I think that the applicant needs to take all the credit for it, to be quite honest. They got the drainage report done, they went to Severn Trent themselves, and we obviously did when we got the drainage report, we did our consultations, but it was made easier for us. Obviously, the local flood authority came back late. I reported that in late reps, and they're saying no comment.
Questions, colleagues? No, in which case we'll go into a debate, and again we have a recommendation. The recommendation should read that we approve the application subject to conditions. Do we have anyone who'd like to make a proposal? Councillor Peacock?
So as I said when we discussed this before, I really strongly think that if we were going to reject it on any grounds other than the drainage, then we should have done so at the last meeting. And therefore, it seems to me that the drainage issue is satisfactorily solved. Therefore, I move that we approve it.
Thank you. That's moved. Councillor Slack?
I'll second that, Chair. I think they've everything's solved right now, so I'll second that. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Dobbs?
Could I just comment and hope that we can learn something from this, but I'm not quite sure what and how we're going to implement it. I mean, what we found was that if it hadn't been for the eagle-eyed next-door neighbour concerned about his septic tank flooding, we would have not got this much better resolution. And can we somehow build in the requirement to have this information when it comes to decision making? Because leading it to just follow the hierarchy of the planning policy framework was what led the developer to suggest infiltration, which clearly, when they tried the infiltration tests, did not work. So there's a lesson here, and I hope we can learn from it. But yes, absolutely, to pass it.
Yes, point well made. Sean, you want to make?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I may, I know I've mentioned it earlier on this evening, but we are currently refreshing and updating the local validation checklist that we've got. One of those will have a drainage requirement in there, a number of points which either are options with the actual applicant in support of their application will have to submit that relevant information. So we can look at that, and obviously that will be circulated to members before going out to consultation. Certainly one of those things could be the drainage element in there. Now obviously it's not a shopping list to achieve everything on a particular site, but as long as there are a number of catch-alls, that it has to be one or the other, or two of the elements we might look for. So that is something we can debate separately on that one, Councillor Dodds.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the Scrutiny Committee is currently scrutinising local lead flood authority advice to the Planning Committee and of the planning function in Derbyshire Dales and other Derbyshire County, Derbyshire district planning authorities. And I'm proposing to take this application forward as one of the examples where residents have provided much needed local knowledge about flooding issues, and this isn't the only one where they have done that, and where they've worked with independent drainage experts to do that, and it demonstrates the difficulty that planning authorities are in, because the NPPF and government policy denigrates local resident input, local knowledge of residents, and we need to ensure, as a planning authority, that we acknowledge the expertise about local conditions that residents have, and ensure that the local lead flood authority does likewise in its investigation of individual planning applications.
Further points anyone would like to make? Well, I've expressed my view on this. I think I'm going to be in a minority, probably of one, that I don't feel able to support this application. I'm disappointed that we haven't paid more attention to the views of the parish council here. Parish council said that the design of this development is not in keeping with the character of the village, and they've explained why that is. And to me, that's an important part of our design policies, our approach to development in the Derbyshire Dales, that new development should reflect the character of settlements and of the Dales as a whole. And I'm afraid I don't find that this development of 4 detached dwellings in a row with a footpath reflects the character of Wyaston or the Dales. To me, it represents what I would call suburban creep. I also feel that 4 detached dwellings doesn't reflect the policy framework we've set for ourselves in providing accommodation to the needs of local residents, where we've said that we would look for a higher proportion of smaller dwellings rather than simply detached dwellings. However, that's my view, which I'm, as chair, I'm able to put forward. But we have a proposer and seconder that the application is approved. So we can have all those in favour, please show. And those against? Any abstentions? One abstention. Can you read the result out, Tommy?
Thank you, Chair. It's 6 for, 6 against and 1 abstention. So it's up to you if you want to use your casting vote.
Well, I'll use my casting vote to say, for the reasons I explained, I don't think this development reflects the policy aspirations set out in our local plan in terms of reflecting the design character of either Wyaston or the Derbyshire Dales, nor do I think the housing mix reflects the policy aspirations we've set out in our local plan. So on that basis, I use my casting vote to make it 7-6 in favour of a refusal.
Can I ask what the outcome of the inspectorate's view would be if that was going to went to appeal?
Sorry, Chair, just to come in, that was actually a motion to approve. So we haven't actually refused the application. We just haven't approved the application. So we do need something else on the table that is a different motion.
It's a good job we've got Tommy Shaw sitting on my left, isn't it? Right, so that proposal is rejected. So we're now open. So I will, from the chair, move that the application is refused for the reasons I've outlined. Councillor Buttle.
I'm happy to second that because it doesn't strike me as being like the rest of the village. You know, it's just sort of like, it's like someone's just dropped a suburban development in there, and it doesn't suit me personally. I wouldn't think it makes the place a deal better. Thank you.
Any further contributions, please, Councillor Archer?
Thanks for the contribution. I'll just take a point of clarification. I thought at a previous meeting when we deferred a decision on a particular issue, when we came back to that meeting, we sort of agreed a principle that we're only then, once the deferrals happen, discussing the reason for deferral. So, you know, I had highlighted on my notes about the comments of the parish council in terms of raising them, because I agree with a lot of what you said, but I thought we were potentially only discussing the drainage issue tonight because that was what the reason for deferral. So that's just something I'm digging for a bit of clarification on whether we can actually now turn it down, having deferred it on drainage issues, or not.
If I can come.
Well, I'll ask our officer's advice, but I've read you the decision of the committee on the 11th of June, which is simply to defer the application for receipt of information relating to drainage. It made no comment on the application itself.
Sorry, Chair, through you, if I can, I've just read the recorded minutes, and that is the case, that the determination of the application be deferred. It doesn't say, and then to solely seek clarification on drainage. Had it said that, then no, you could not have made the decision.
So just to clarify, that is different because we did have a very similar conversation in a previous meeting.
We did
so
indeed.
so there is a difference then here.
The previous meeting was the fact that it narrowed it down that it was deferred to seek
Right.
clarification on
Okay.
points A, B and C.
Okay.
This isn't how that's recorded.
Sorry, did someone else, who else wanted to, Lucy, you wanted to come in?
Oh, yeah. I forgot what I was going to say because I do feel it's unfair. I do think that once we've discussed it, then we should have made this. If we were going to reject it on the grounds that you say, and there is some point in that, then we should have done it at the last meeting, as I just said. But more to the point, the reason that these houses look quite similar is because they were advised that by our officers, and I feel that given that, then we should approve it. I feel that that would give them a very strong case at any kind of appeal.
Further contributions? Right, we'll move to a vote. We have the proposal to refuse on the grounds that I set out. All those in favour of that proposal, please show. Those against? And those abstaining? Read the result out, Tommy, please.
Sorry, Chair, could we just have those against again? I think the hands changed slightly. And there were 2 abstentions, is that correct? Yeah. Yeah, so that's 6 for, 5 against and 2 abstentions.
So that application is refused. Right, our final item this season is item 6, is our planning appeal progress report. Sean, is there anything you want to add to this?
There's nothing really specific to draw any members' attention to the list, other than Sorry, no, there isn't, Chair. There's just the, it has taken as read, there are still a few that are awaiting decisions from written reps and residential applications. There's no big applications on there at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody want to ask any questions of that? No. Can we have a recommendation to receive, please? Councillor Dobbs. Councillor Shelley. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. That concludes our meeting. We finish an hour early this evening, so well done. Yeah. Have a safe journey home.